Everybody, it's 1:30. The inquiry is resumed. Ms Nevin, any docs you want me to have up, or are you going to just bring them up as we go along? I've got the proofs open.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, it's mostly the proofs, and then there are just a few other documents, not many. I'm happy to flag them up now or just take you to them as we go along. It's probably only a couple.
Take me to them as we go along and I'll pull them up. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Am I loud enough, by the way? Can everybody hear me? That better? Great, thank you. Okay, Mr. Kershaw, I will formally introduce you to the inquiry. You are Sam Kershaw. You're co-director of Save Marlowe's Greenbelt.
I am.
You are a recently retired technology executive with over 25 years experience in the technology, media and entertainment industry.
Correct.
You've previously worked with companies involved in the production, distribution and delivery of film and TV content.
Correct.
You've also contributed to the definition of standards published by the Society of Motion Pictures and Television Engineers and the European Broadcast Union.
Correct.
In the latter part of your career, you worked on high-end TV streaming platforms.
Correct.
So to what extent, Mr. Kershaw, then, has this experience informed your ability to provide accurate and informed evidence to this inquiry on need and economic benefits?
So I'm familiar with the entire content chain from production through to delivery. I understand the business objectives of the media companies. Oh, I'm sorry. This is going to be a problem. I do speak rather quickly, I'm afraid. Okay, so yes, I'm familiar with the whole content chain from the production through to the delivery. I'd say more expertise in the delivery side than on the production side, but I am familiar with it, and so I understand the business commercial factors which influence the business within which film studios operate.
Thank you. And do you recall last week Mr. White questioned the co-director of Save Marlowe's Greenbelt, Mr. Sherwin?
I do.
And Mr. Sherwin, in that capacity, you might remember, ma'am, appeared as an interested party. And Mr. White asked him about some meetings that took place, did he not, between Save Marlowe's Greenbelt and studios in the run-up to this inquiry?
He did.
And there's an obvious implicit suggestion, isn't there, in that line of questioning? And, well, essentially, it's that Save Marlowe's Greenbelt is an economic objector working with the film studios. I mean, that was sort of the line of questioning.
I detected.
But I want to ask Mr. Kershaw. I think it is appropriate that we get this out of the way at the start of his questioning. That was the.
I'd be interested to know about the involvement.
Absolutely.
But the implication that you just made, I don't think is fair, because I think Mr. White did just ask factual questions of the co-chair of the Rule 6 party. I know you said he came up as an interested party, but he said he was the co-chair, and therefore he's part of the Rule 6 parties. Is a main party to the inquiry. So
that's fair.
Okay.
I'll ask Mr. Kershaw about that.
Thank you.
So, I mean, just to clear up the matter of the involvement.
Okay.
How many meetings have you had with people from other studios?
At the studios themselves, as part of this campaign, I've met with 2 studio owners.
And what can you say about those meetings?
The purpose of the meetings was for me to get greater background in the business of the film studio operators, and it was mostly fact-finding. We contacted both of them, and they agreed to meet them. They were contacted via friends of friends, and they were gracious enough to accommodate us, gave us a tour of the studios, answered my questions. which were factual questions. They weren't related to developing the case that I'm presenting here. And subsequently, I spoke to one of them on a number of occasions over the last, I don't know, 6 months, something like that.
And which studios were these, Mr. Kershaw?
I met with the CEO of Shinfield Studios, and I visited there. The other studio that I met with, I cannot reveal because I'm under NDA.
And when did these meetings take place?
Okay, I made a timeline because I thought you might ask me this. The first visit to Shinfield Studios was the first call I had with the CEO of Shinfield Studios was in July 2022. I visited Shinfield. I never spoke to him until 2024 when I visited Shinfield Studios to have a look around and get some background information. And then I visited another studio in December 2024. So basically 2 visits. I have to say that prior to this whole planning application, I have visited studios elsewhere as part of my work. I visited studios in Hollywood, in Culver City, and in Burbank. So I have, but this was a while ago, so it's not really relevant.
And why did you want to speak to studio representatives and go to these studios?
I wanted to get an understanding of what a studio looked like, how it operates. I wanted to get facts and figures about utilization, about the business in general. So it was basically facts to make sure that I could develop a case which was founded on truth.
And so is this what you were referring to, Mr. Kershaw, at paragraph 1.4 of your proof, when you said some background information has been obtained from industry insiders, but is not attributable due to commercial confidentiality? This information is identified as anecdotal.
That is correct. Although I would say that I have got information from other industry insiders, not those that I've just mentioned, and that has been gained through the campaigning activities that we've been engaged in. So either at meetings, public meetings we've had, or rattling collection boxes on the street. I've met quite a lot of people who work in the film production industry, and they have been helpful. Many of them have been in favor of Marlow Film Studios, I have to say, and I was very interested to understand their reasons for supporting it. And many of the film industry professionals I spoke to were against it as well, but they provided me with valuable information as well. And the reason I can't attribute it to them is I can't remember their names.
And do you recall during Mr. White's discussion with Mr. Sherwin that he did ask about the funding arrangement?
I do.
For participation at this inquiry, and asked, was there any studio involvement there? What can you clarify about the nature of how Save Marlow's Greenbelt has funded its participation at this inquiry?
Understood. So the vast majority of the money that we have raised has been through private donations. We've had a number of events in which we've asked for money, and we've been, as I say, out on the streets shaking a collection tin. But we have received funding from 4 organisations, from the Marlow Society, a representative of which spoke in the public sessions, from the Little Marlow Residents Association, from the Coldmahome Lane Residents Association, and from Wild Marlow. So these organisations have contributed to our funds. Coldmahome Lane, it's you may have walked up there on your tour.
And do you remember that Mr. White also asked Mr. Sherwin if Save Marlow's Greenbelt had thought to invite the appellant or the council along to any of its meetings at studios? Do you recall that question?
I do.
And well, the appellant has 5 need witnesses before this inquiry. Did any of them ever invite you along to any of their research gathering
No.
meetings? No. And When did you decide, Mr. Kershaw, to object to this application?
It's a good question. Again, I produced a timeline because I thought this may come up. So I first became aware of the application in July 2021 in my capacity as chairman of the Culmer Home Residents Association. I think it had been announced prior to that, but I wasn't aware of it. And when I first heard about it, I was reasonably positive about it. I thought it could be a good thing for the area. I was invited to a reception at Liston Court in which I met Mr. Laycock and saw presentations of the development of the plans, at which point I'd say my stance became more ambivalent. Then I was invited to a local residents tour, which I think Mr. Barracliff led with Mrs. Tollett, and at that point my stance became negative as I realized the consequences of the development. But I was still open-minded, I would say. And then I'm also a member of Little Marlow Parish Council. I was invited in that capacity on a tour of the site in which a number of local councillors were attending, and spoke with Mr. Laycock and Mr. Stoner. And because of my background in the industry, I had some questions about the commercial aspects of the development. And from my conversations with them, I'd say I became very skeptical about the value of this development, and that I became opposed. And so my opposition was really driven by a belief that the harm that the studio would inevitably cause could not be justified by the benefits that it could offer. And that has been my stance since then, and that has been the basis for the objections that I submitted to the council and my case here today.
Thank you, Mr. Kershaw. I now propose just to set out the line of questioning and sequence of the examination in chief, just to give you a bit of a roadmap, ma'am. And well, first it's to pick up on a point you raised earlier as well, just about a general overview of how the film studio business operates. Then looking at studio supply, studio demand, whether supply is meeting demand now, whether it will continue to meet demand for the foreseeable future, and then finally a critique of the socio-economic benefits put forward by the appellant. So that's a brief flavour of what's to come. So then on the film studio business.
Yes.
Mr. Kershaw, I don't think there's any dispute between us on the definition of the Grade A classification of film studios.
Mm-hmm.
And at this inquiry, we're obviously concerned with the particular of the market of the UK's high-end sort of quality film and TV sector and the extent of its need for Grade A studio space.
That's certainly the argument that the appellant is putting forward. The classification of Grade A, I think, is I don't know for sure, but I think it's an invention of the property development market rather than a term which is used within the industry. I may be wrong about that, but I think that a strict kind of delineation between studios, Grade A, Grade B plus, Grade B, etc. It may be useful, but I think that there's such a spectrum of facilities that are operated by studios. They can't be divided quite so accurately, discreetly. So I think that whilst I acknowledge that some studios are purpose-built, large, flexible, have high ceilings, and all the other kind of characteristics which are required for large-scale productions, I think it's a spectrum, and there's no absolute relationship between a type of production, its budget, and the type of studio it requires. From my understanding, that's what I've been led to believe.
Thank you. And at section 2 of your proof, this is where you set out the global market and the nature of the industry.
Yes.
And you say here at paragraph 2.1 that studios compete for footloose productions in an international marketplace.
Yes.
And at paragraph 2.2, 2 pages over, you identify, don't you, the USA as the main driver of investment in the global film and HGTV market.
That's correct. So for the benefit of people who aren't familiar with the film studio business, it's essentially part of the property rental sector. They build big sheds and rent them out to film production companies. And so it's comparable to other segments of that sector. But in the case of the film studio business, the majority of the expenditure, which is their income, comes from the United States. And I'm sure we'll go through this later, but the data from the BFI demonstrates that quite clearly. So we look at the ways in which different film studios compete for that US expenditure. And it's important to point out that UK studios aren't just competing with other UK studios, they're competing with studios across the globe, primarily in the Anglosphere, primarily Canada, United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand are the main, I'd say, markets in which other studios which compete for that US expenditure are located.
Might just pause there
Oh,
for a moment.
Yes, sorry.
How dependent is the UK's HGTV and film industry on this US production company market?
It's hugely. I don't have a percentage off the top of my head. I could work it out, but it must be 70 or 80% of the revenues that studios receive is from US-based productions.
And you mentioned just now the English language market.
Yeah.
And at paragraph 2.4 of your proof, you do say here that streaming platforms like Netflix, like Amazon, are increasing their production of non-English language HGTV content. So how is this shift impacting production companies' choice of studios in this global market?
So as I mentioned at the beginning of the document, where I explain the criteria which producers use to select a studio, cultural affinity is an important factor. So as you mentioned, Netflix and Amazon are investing more in what we would call foreign language content, non-English language content. They tend to go to the studios within the countries in which that language is spoken in order to produce the film or HGTV content, and that is a larger proportion of the production expenditure from these companies now. But that activity has spurred an investment in studio infrastructure in these other countries, who see the prospect of investment from the United States as an attractive proposition, and therefore their governments have put in place incentives and other schemes in order to strengthen their production industry.
Just about to come on to that point of incentives, actually. So that was a good moment to pause.
Okay.
You identify, just looking at your proof again, paragraph 2.1.
Yes.
You identify here a number of criteria that you list, external and internal factors that have a bearing, you say, on whether a particular studio is successful in getting a slice of this competitive global pie.
Indeed.
And you mentioned 2.1a, government incentives.
Yes.
And you agree in this paragraph, don't you, that fiscal incentives are indeed important in influencing a producer's choice of studio?
I'd say the most important. From what I've heard from and read, it's one of the most important factors in a producer's choice. The UK has a very good scheme it's very competitive, and it's been a big factor in the UK's success and growth. But these relative incentives are not static. They're determined by government policy and competition, and so they do change from time to time. We've seen recently that President Trump has been talking about the need to win back the film industry for Los Angeles, or for America as a whole. He's appointed some ambassadors, I think he calls them, in order to inform him about how he might achieve that. And the obvious thing that they would do is to improve the incentives. And in the United States at the moment, the incentives are mostly state-based incentive. There is no federal incentive, and I think there's a push by Hollywood, by the film industry, to get a federal-based incentive, and also each state is also being pushed to improve the incentives in order to win back the business.
And so in this
Do you want to use mine?
Can I? No, there we go. I'm on now. Where's that from? Sorry. Is there a reference to that, or is
there is a reference to an initiative for the federal package. Now you're going to have to bear with me because I'm not very quick at this, but
I have a reference from the appellant's evidence as well. I have one to hand, ma'am, if you'd like it. Yeah, it's it's in the proof of evidence of Amanda Neville, CD 8009. I'm afraid you'll have to click on a link in a footnote to find it, but there's quite a good overview in footnote 11.
And I'm trying to find mine.
In footnote 11, it has a document, I recall, about different initiatives around the world on studio space, and there's I think it's at the first page or two, there's an overview of federal and state measures in the US. I think Mr. Kershaw has another reference for you as well, ma'am.
Yes, CD 13038. It's a letter from a US member of Congress, which explains his desire to improve US incentives in order to help the US film and production industry recover.
So then in this global context, Mr. Kershaw, how, I suppose, unique and important then do you consider the UK's fiscal incentives to be in attracting business in this global market?
I think they're crucial. They're one of the most important factors in Britain's success. It's the second largest producer of English language film and HGTV content, and I think the incentives are a big factor in us achieving that, together with other factors which you may ask me about in a moment.
You, in your evidence, and others, indeed independent parties before this inquiry have mentioned the independent film tax credit that was introduced in the 2024 spring budget.
Yes.
In relation to this particular incentive, how much of an influence do you think it will have in enticing high-end film and TV production companies to shoot at Grade A film studios in the UK?
It's almost irrelevant. This is for independent films. Independent films are largely funded from the UK. They don't use the so-called Grade A studios. They can't afford them. They don't need that space. So, and given that the kind of cash repayable as a consequence of this incentive is only around £5 million, and given that Marlowe Film Studios is targeting blockbusters, as they say, and large-scale productions, I think its impact on Marlowe is it doesn't have any impact on Marlowe, to my belief.
And moving on to one of the other criteria you cite, the suitability of studios and facilities.
Yes.
And paragraph 2.1d, essentially what you do in that paragraph, I think, is you essentially work your way down from bigger studios, large campuses, as you say,
Yeah.
Shepperton Studios, to moderate-sized facilities, to smaller facilities.
Yes. Yes. Mr. White earlier today mentioned hotels, and I think that's a very good analogy. There are hotels to suit all budgets, from Airbnbs to the Savoy or the Ritz, and same goes for film studios. They are each type of film studio, each category, each class has a different sort of target market, and that's, I guess, has to be expected.
And are the sort of premium grade A studios the only studios capable of catering to the high-end film and HGTV market?
This is a difficult question, and I did ask people when I was doing my research about this, and it's not cut and dried. I mean, the huge blockbusters, the Marvel films, where there's lots of special effect, or rather, lots of huge sets and a lot of let's say complexity in the production. They do require large scale studio space, and they have a budget to support that, and they will require the facilities that the kind of studio that Marlowe is proposing requires: high studios, all the facilities to enable the sets to be created, the lighting to be done. All of this, I have no argument with. The top end of the market does need these large studios, but there's not that many of those films produced every year, which we'll come on to when we talk about demand. But even some of the very popular, successful streaming productions, high-end television productions, don't require the high-end grade A studios. They can use much smaller scale facilities. I gave some examples in my evidence about this. So there's no direct correlation between the type of production, the budget of the production, and this type of facility or the location of the facility that is selected. It's not as simple as that.
And are you aware of any non-grade A studio that's been able to traverse that divide and provide nonetheless high quality facilities?
Yeah, I think, Longcross is a good example. Longcross is not a purpose-built, brand new studio. It's a conversion, and yet Netflix have a lease there. Or had a lease there. I can't remember whether they still have or not. But they obviously found that the facilities there, which would not, I think, be categorized as grade A, was sufficient for it to produce the kind of content that it wants to produce. So it is really horses for courses, and there's no real clear distinction or a way of segmenting the market. I think that's the key issue. You can't really segment the market based on production spend, based on content genre, based on any kind of criteria, and then allocate that to a particular type of studio. It's a very big spectrum on both the supply and the demand side, I think.
And moving on to another factor, you mentioned the question of clusters and creative alignment. Well, there are two separate factors you mentioned, but I might take them together just for the purposes of my next question.
Yeah.
You mentioned there the potential impact of cloud networking tech and AI on studio choice and location. And so my question on that really is, how do you think these developments will impact the global demand for studio space?
Okay, so let me take each of those in turn. So the clusters is no doubt important. Clusters in any industry are important. They improve productivity, reduce costs, make things more convenient, particularly in the availability of staff and crew. And so, you know, everyone knows Hollywood is the place where you produce films, and there are, you know, all the facilities and crew there that they need. And similarly, in London in the southeast, we have a huge range of talent which enables us to produce world-beating films. And that's a consequence of the clustering effect. So I have no doubt that that is an important factor. The extent of that cluster is a different matter, which I think we'll probably come on to later. In terms of the creative and cultural alignment, I did mention that, but as I said, there seems to be maybe less of an absolute necessity that the film, if it's, you know, as I gave in my example, if it's about Paris, about the Eiffel Tower, it doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, shot in France. The use of things like these LED volume screens and to some extent AI enables producers to create very realistic visualizations of the set, of the background, to make their choice of studios more flexible.
I know it's difficult to look into a crystal ball on that point, but to what extent do you think that will influence demand for studio space going forward?
Artificial intelligence, I don't know. I mean, obviously the strikes in the US were because of AI. The writers' strike, they were concerned that AI will be used for writing scripts. The actors' strike, I think, was related to fears that AI would take their image and voice and reduce their demand for them in person. So it's already having an influence. In terms of the production technology, I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. I've seen various reports, but none of them are particularly conclusive. But I would say that an indication of the uncertainty and concern about it is reflected in Tyler Perry's decision not to go ahead with a big studio development in Atlanta that he was planning to do after he saw a tool called Sora, which he felt was would have a huge influence on the studio business. Now, I'm not qualified to say whether that's the case or not, but I recognize that his judgment is probably indicative of some likelihood that it's going to have an effect.
Then just one of the final points on this international competitive market. There is a sort of, I suppose if one could call it, a keeping up with the Joneses point in the appellant's evidence. And it's really well summarised at paragraph 2.13 of Ms. Neville's proof of evidence, CD 8009.
Sorry, which paragraph again?
2.13. Let me know when you're there.
CD 800
009. CD 8009.
Okay, sorry, I got the wrong one. Okay, let me read it. I've no doubt.
Just for the benefit maybe of members of the public who don't have that immediately before them, the point raised in that paragraph is that the UK film industry, well, it can't afford to be complacent because it's facing a changing global industry and it will fall behind if it doesn't respond to the competition. And my question on that paragraph and that point, Mr. Kershaw, was to what extent do you consider a fear of falling behind the international competition justifies a positive need case for Marlow Film Studios?
It's not cut and dried. You know, the ability of the UK to maintain its position is not necessarily all about having more space. I think one of the biggest factors in the UK maintaining its position is having enough crew in order to staff the movie productions. But in terms of the modernize and etc., yeah, no doubt. I mean, and this is happening. You know, virtual production is becoming a bigger and bigger thing, and studios are investing in the technology to enable them to do that. But I don't think that the need to, or the need not to be complacent necessarily means just more space. It means a lot of different things. So I have no disagreement with her in general, but I don't think that it implies that more space is required.
Thank you. I was going to move on to the question of supply now, unless, ma'am, you've got any questions about the industry. I just note your comment earlier that you wanted an overview of that. But
Yeah. No, I think that's given me a good overview, and I'm presuming next week and tomorrow I'll get even more of an overview. So that is helpful, what you've run through up to yet. So I'm happy for you to move on. Thank you.
Thank you. So then, looking at the question of supply, if we could just take up your rebuttal proof, please, Mr. Kershaw.
Yes.
And I'd like us particularly then to look at paragraph 2.2a, please.
2.2a, yes.
And this is where you set out that you estimate the total current supply of studio space to be 6.8 million square feet.
Yeah,
correct?
that's after I corrected my original estimate based on on the evidence of the appellant's witnesses, where I identified I'd made some mistakes, and I corrected them, or I made some omissions, let's say, not mistakes. And yeah, I changed my estimate from, I think, low 6 to 6.8. In regards to the discrepancy between my estimate and that of Mr. Davis of 7.5 million square feet, I think that's due to the fact that Mr. Davis includes a wider range of studio types than I did. I very specifically focused on those which are used for film production and high-end television, whereas I think his includes so-called shiny floor studios, which are used for TV production, light entertainment sort of stuff. And I think he also includes temporary space as well, which I decided not to include. I wanted to make sure that my numbers were stood up to scrutiny. So yeah, that's the cause of the discrepancy. There's a minor discrepancy between what I estimate and what Lambert Smith Hampton estimates, but it's not an exact science. There's a degree of error, and I'm confident that this figure is more or less accurate.
Thank you. So I want to just go on a bit of a journey now to look at how the supply situation has evolved in recent years, and importantly, well, the factors that have influenced that evolution.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could ask you then to go back to your main proof of evidence.
Yep.
It's paragraph 3.3. And this is where you refer to a streaming bubble and streaming wars.
Yes.
And you talk in this section of your proof about Netflix and Amazon launching in 2007 and 11, and then new streaming platforms coming online from 2019.
Yes.
Then at paragraph 2.6 of your proof, you mention that studio capacity has doubled between 2019 and 2024, and you say that doubling happened to meet the accelerating demand of HETV content.
I think that was the main driver, yes. I think that's generally agreed to have been the main driver. Yeah, the film production has largely been flat. The investment or the expenditure on film production has largely been flat. The growth in expenditure over the last 5 years has almost entirely been down to high-end television, and that increased expenditure on high-end television resulted in a shortage of studio space, which developers responded to. Also, the British Film Commission, led by Adrian Wotton, launched an initiative to encourage the construction of more studio space. But yeah, basically, the increase in supply was driven by an increase in demand by the streaming companies. Why did they do that? Well, they, as I say, were established in the early 2010s, 2013, 14, something like that. Netflix came online. And in order to establish the market, they had to provide content that people were prepared to pay for. And so they spent a lot of money producing excellent content and dumping it onto their platform as quickly as possible in order to get people excited and get them to pay subscriptions. And then other streamers came online, Paramount, Disney Plus, Apple, and it became a kind of a battle for market share, as well as continuing to try and grow the market. And so there's a huge expenditure on content, which is known within the industry as the content bubble, and consequently, they were spending huge amounts of money. And the UK, because of its prominent position in the global industry for English language production, got a good share of that, and probably could have got more if it had more studio space at the time. That was certainly something which I know that the PwC report says that we lost productions as a consequence of not having enough space. I'm sure that was the case. In fact, Andrew Smith of Pinewood reported to the parliamentary committee that that was the case. And I think that encouraged and stimulated a lot of investment in new studios, encouraged by the property real estate agents who buy and sell land to achieve this. Yeah, there was a bubble in studio production. It was the hot area, as data centers are the hot area now.
How long then did that increased demand for studio space last?
Probably 4 or 5 years, something like that. I don't have detailed growth figures of studio space, but I think that it roughly aligns with the kind of peak TV period.
And during that peak TV period, was supply successful at keeping up with the level of demand?
I think not. I think in the early days it wasn't. I think that there was a shortage, but then new space came online, and as we'll talk about, the demand reduced, and the shortage was a blip, really. It was a temporary event, and as we'll discuss later, I think it's no longer the case.
Might be a convenient moment then just to look at the new space that you say came online during that period.
Yes.
And you have a table, Mr. Kershaw, at 2.7 of your proof.
Table. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Could you just explain what that table is to the inspector, please?
So that is a table of the pipeline of consented planning applications for large studios. I wouldn't say it's exhaustive, but it's indicative. It contains the main ones, and it shows the provision of new stages and production space associated with each of those planning applications, and it shows the status at the time of writing that I managed to determine.
And you said just now that new space came online to meet the increase in demand.
Yes.
Are any of these studios here attributed to that?
The ones in the consented pipeline, you mean?
Yes.
I think they all are. I mean, Pinewood's original planning application for the expansion that's mentioned here, I think, was an absolute response to this perceived continued growth in demand. And as we have seen from Mr. Smith's evidence to Parliament, and to the liaison group in Ivor Heath, and the announcement today, they don't seem to have the demand that they anticipated doesn't not seem to have been realized.
I
today?
was just coming on to that, ma'am. So I've cleared this, my learned friends. Ma'am, we've got essentially a press release that came out this morning by Pinewood Group, and it was announcing a public consultation on the future development options for the land earmarked for expansion. And essentially, I'll hand up the document now so you can see it. My learned friends already have a copy. Do you want a hard copy as well?
No, no, if you read it out, that's fine.
Thank you.
So the press release, ma'am, mentions that there's going to be a public consultation, and that will start in February, and it will look at development options for the site. And it talks about looking at the expansion and investment of the additional film stages and production facilities alongside the development of a data centre.
Okay. Mr. White, are you happy for this to come in? Yep, okay. What number does it get then, please?
The ID number. Pinewood one has gone in first. Yes, sir.
81.
81.
CP 81.
Okay, thank you.
ID 81 rather. Thank you.
So that's hot off the press. It's kind of quite surprising because Pinewood has been around for nearly 100 years. It's synonymous with film production in the UK. It's our most famous studio. And for them to decide that the land is better used as a data center than new sound stages is quite a surprise to me anyway.
If we could just look at the parliamentary committee document at CD 13.10, and it's PDF page 28. The bottom of the page, there's the quote from Andrew Smith about Pinewood. And he talks about having planning permission for Pinewood, and they're going to adopt a very cautious approach to that development because we want to see where the demand is going. Mr. Kershaw, to what extent, or what do you think about this news that's come in this morning on Pinewood in light of that comment of Mr. Smith taking a cautious approach?
Well,
yes, it's CD 13 and it's 10. It's number 10 and it's PDF page 28.
which question is it? Just
It's question 243. Questions about studio capacity. And just for the benefit to situate in time, this is from the 19th of March 24.
yes. So the question was, what do I think of today's announcement in light of what Mr. Smith said to the parliamentary inquiry?
Do you
Well,
have his comment in front of you? It's at the very bottom of the page,
yeah,
and he talks adopting a cautious approach to see where demand is going.
to see where demand is going. I think that's the key phrase, isn't it? To see where demand is going. Well, the demand seems to be more for data centers than it does for film studios. And you would imagine that Pinewood would know. And Pinewood has the connections with the industry. It has very strong management, and they will understand where the market is going, and they have apparently decided it's not going towards the need for more studio space, and they're better off using that land as a data center. That's the clear conclusion that I've made.
And then just while we're on the topic of news hot off the press, there's another development. And again, I've cleared this with my learned friends. And this is to do with if we just look at your table, Mr. Kershaw, it's the second production, the second studio there, home of production. So
Yes.
there's some news in relation to that. I'll hand it to the inspector.
Yes. Do I let you read it for a moment? Okay.
82. ID 82. Thank you.
So what's notable about this studio is it's very, very similar to the proposed Marlow film studio. It's almost exactly the same amount of stage space, 470,000 square feet. Home of production, we're proposing 22 stages, whereas Marlow is 18. It's also on the site of an old gravel pit, I think. So it's very similar. It's also kind of in the West London cluster, whatever the West London cluster is today. I'd already removed it from my pipeline because there was a lot of, industry expectation that it wouldn't go ahead. But now this news that was released a couple of days ago confirms that. And again, in my view, indicates a lack of demand for new purpose-built grade A studio space.
We moved then from supply to demand.
Could I just mention Sunset Studios as well?
Yes.
So Sunset Studios is another large development of comparable size to Marlow Film Studios, not in the West London cluster, it's on the east side of London, but it was backed by a major film studio management group, Hudson Pacific. It was their project, and it was backed by Blackstone, one of the largest private equity companies in the world. They did the groundworks. They spent, I heard they spent £1 million or so pounds on the groundworks, but they're sort of down tools now. There's a statement on their website which says that they are assessing the current climate and intend to continue once market rates and construction financing stabilize. That's been the case for a while now. I think the general consensus with the industry is that project's dead as well. Again, another indication in my mind that the demand isn't there for these purpose-built grade A studios anymore.
Are there any other studios in that column that you'd like to comment on?
Well, Leavesden's interesting. Their expansion, I put 2025 here. I understand it's 2027. That was my error. So they are going ahead with this expansion at Leavesden. But Leavesden is owned by Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers produce movies, so it's their own sort of production facility. So they know what the demand is because they're creating the demand. And I think that a large part of this, is to do with a Harry Potter television series that's going to be produced. I'm not certain about that, but they clearly are continuing to expand because they control the supply of funding that enables them to have confidence to expand. And I think similarly, Bray Studios in Windsor, which is owned by Amazon, is also expanding to accommodate Amazon productions, additional Amazon productions. So what it seems to me by looking at this is that the studios where they are owned or have a master 12. I think this is the one I was looking for.
Parliamentary inquiry.
I don't have numbers on my PDF.
Just put it in your page number on your PDF search.
Oh, I see. Good point. What is it number?
It's
We're
that
back on.
page 20.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Okay, we're back live again now. So we were at CD 13032.
CD 13032, PDF page 20. And I just want to look at a comment made by Benjamin King. It's second paragraph down, and he's commenting on the introduction of this practice of taking long-term leases. And he says there, I think the decision to take long-term leases was made a few years ago now, when we originally made a decision to double down on our production and investment commitment in the UK. And it was to some extent dictated by what was available in the market at the time. And you said to me just a few minutes ago, Mr. Kershaw, that this practice came about when there was a shortage of studio space, and essentially companies wanted to ensure that they would have some space for at least 10 years.
This is what I've been told, yes.
And to what extent does Mr. King's comment corroborate that evidence you've put forward?
Well, he says a few years ago, and that kind of corresponds to the timing that I'm referring to. And it also reinforces my belief that, you know, the UK has got a very valuable role to play in international production. So there's a great desire for studios to locate here. And so I think that it kind of corroborates what I said, yeah.
Now, just thinking about what the appellant says about this.
Yeah.
Well, the appellant claims, of course, that this practice is actually creating a shortage of space for Grade A studios.
Yes.
And there are two references for that. The first is paragraph 4.19 of the Knight Frank report. Hope it's the Knight Frank report and not Mr. Davis's, but we'll soon find out.
Where are you in the Knight Frank report?
I'm not finding it, I'm
Oh, you're not
afraid. I'm
finding it,
wondering if
okay.
I've confused it with Mr. Davis's. Thank you. Page. I put in a word search. Apologies, bear with me.
It's all right. Always helps. It's what I do when I wonder where I am in the core docs.
I have second reference, all else fails. I will try the second reference. It's Mr. Chodorovich's proof, and it's paragraph 10.
Yes.
But both paragraphs say the same thing. Mr. Chodorovich's puts it this way about the rapid growth in production combined with the Hollywood studios' practice of securing long-term leases has led to a shortage of purpose-built soundstage space in the UK, and that stimulated the expansion of existing studios. So I'd just like your views, Mr. Kershaw, on this argument of the appellant that, well, these MLAs are actually creating a shortage.
I don't think this argument has any merit whatsoever. The companies that are leasing this space are the companies that are providing the expenditure on production. So if you are going to somehow remove those studios under lease from the available supply, then you have to equally remove the expenditure of the associated companies from the forecast demand. It's neutral. There's no question of the shortage, the supposed shortage, being exacerbated by this master lease agreement. Both sides of the supply and demand equation are balanced out.
Are there any Grade A facilities in the UK market that you're aware of that are not locked into MLAs?
Yeah, it was mentioned this morning. Shinfield is the most notable one.
And to what extent are you aware of occupancy rates at Shinfield, for example?
Well, operators don't reveal occupancy rates because it's commercially sensitive information. So I don't know is the answer. It doesn't look full when you drive past it on the M4. That's for sure. The car park's so empty. I don't know if that's a good indication or not, but yeah, I don't want to comment on occupancy rates, particularly not of studios that I visited. It's not public domain information, and it is a problem for all of us at this inquiry that there are no reliable sources of occupancy rates.
You do comment in your proof on rates of unemployment in the industry.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I take your point, obviously, on the difficulty in giving exact figures on occupancy rates, but to what extent would you consider unemployment rates to be a helpful proxy for looking at rates of occupancy in studios?
I think it is a useful proxy because, as we know, the crew are footloose and they travel from studio to studio depending upon the work that's available. And if the studios don't have work, they don't have work and they're unemployed. And that was the subject of a Guardian article last year, which
just for the CD reference, that Guardian article, I think the one you're referring to is CD 13003.
Quite possibly. And you know, Beck2 also have released statistics on employment, which Beck2, it's the union for film and TV production workers. That is before you. I don't have the reference to hand, but I'm sure we can find it. It's a press release from them.
There's CD 13017.
That's it.
Half of UK screen industry workers remain out of work. Yes, that must be the one.
That's the one. So that's the proxy. But also, as was mentioned this morning, you know, the space to expenditure ratio is an indicator that there's that the occupancy is, I think Mr. Fannin said it 40-something%. That was his estimate. I've not checked that myself, but it sounds reasonable. So I think that, yeah, looking at the discrepancy between the amount of space that's available and the amount of space that would be required based on the production expenditure also is a good indication of overall occupancy. Studio by studio, we can't say. As I mentioned, Pinewood is fully leased by Disney, so they have 100% occupancy, which is great for them. But so it's really difficult to look at these things in a segmented fashion. For example, grade A studio occupancy or grade B plus studio occupancy. I think you have to look at it across the industry as a whole, because the smaller segment you take, the less reliable the analysis is.
Do you remember earlier Mr. White put to Mr. Fannin that, well, the only free-floating grade A studio in the UK currently is Shinfield?
Yeah, he did, yeah.
And the point was made that this means there is inherently a need for this space. This is the only one that's free-floating.
Yeah.
What are your views about that?
Well, the first view is, well, okay, so who would require that space? Let's look at the major production companies that haven't already got either a lease or ownership of facilities in the UK. And that really is three major studios, Paramount, Sony, and Apple. And so they will be candidates for Shinfield. But as we've already said, you know, particularly Apple doesn't necessarily need grade A studio space, so it can go elsewhere, as it has done. It's gone elsewhere. It's gone to lower grade studios to produce various TV series. Paramount and Sony, yeah, they could potentially lease space there, but I don't know what his order book looks like, so I don't know.
Are you aware of any production companies struggling to get grade A space
No.
in the UK?
No, I mean, the testimony from the parliamentary inquiry is quite clear that the major producers who attended that inquiry had no difficulty in finding space. One of them said, sometimes it's difficult, but we always find space. Let's get that reference up.
This is Mr. Wotton's comments.
No, it's the one beneath that.
Mr. Smith's?
No, it's the one. It's paragraph 4.2 in my proof.
Okay.
And it's this is an extract from it, but it is referenced. It's you'll need the number, won't you? Just a sec.
CD 1332.
Oh, thank you.
And it's question 243. CD 13.
Yeah, that you're right, madam. So there's two different film inquiry exhibits or evidence that I use. One is from a session in which Adrian Wotton of the British Film Commission was asked, would you say that we have the studio capacity to make the most of that demand? He replies, for the last 3 years, the British Film Commission has been involved in a major exercise, which I described earlier.
PDF, page 28 of CD 1310. Yes.
And he says, so the one thing I'm not worried about in that sense is studio capacity. We have the studio capacity to meet demand. What the UK and international industry are now working very hard on is to match the skills with that studio capacity. So that's the guy who initiated a an initiative to increase the studio space in the UK is pretty much saying mission accomplished. Then, if we look at the other proof, or rather that same document, Andrew Smith of Pinewood, who obviously has his finger on the pulse, said in reply to the same question that 5 years ago we would have said there's not enough capacity. In fact, we would have evidenced feature films going to other jurisdictions because we did not have that capacity. We now do have that capacity in the UK, not just around London, but in the nations and regions. So that's the guy from Pinewood, who I assume was involved in the decision to turn some of their land into a data centre. Then the other the other report from the parliamentary inquiry, which Ms. Evans might be able to advise me of.
PD 13032. Is there somewhere in particular you want to go?
Question 378.
Let's get the PDF page number. Control of 21. Thank you, Mr. Bird.
And so this is a question to representatives of major investors in content production. So a guy from Paramount, a guy from Netflix, a guy from NBC and Universal, and a guy from Amazon. And they are asked, do you think the UK has enough studio infrastructure to keep up with all your company needs? So these are the guys who actually look for studio space, and they're being asked, is there enough studio space? And each of them says yes. So back to your question about what companies could potentially use Shinfield or other studios. Well, these are the companies, and they're not lacking in choice or availability.
The next topic I'd like to look, it's still in this general broad section, but is essentially about the segmentation of supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at the Knight-Frank report at 2.2.1, the heading there is the current market landscape. What type of operator wants what space, where, and why? In your opinion, Mr. Kershaw, has the appellant been clear enough in quantifying the extent of the demand and segmenting that demand for those particular facilities?
Okay, let me just remind myself what it says.
Yes, it's to what extent, in your view, has the appellant been clear enough in quantifying the extent of that demand for those particular facilities?
Well, they don't quantify it. That's the problem. I mean, they've identified different categories of production, which are reasonable in my opinion. Although the category of blockbuster isn't mentioned here, and that's something which I think the appellant is very keen to support. But yeah, they identify the different categories of production, but I've not seen in any of the evidence from the appellant an actual quantification of what the demand of studio space is for those types of production, nor for the expenditure for those different types of production. So just stepping back a moment from this, what we're looking at here is it's less of a planning issue than a business case. And if you're writing a business case, you need to understand your market, you need to segment your market, you have to look at how your going to serve that market, you need to look at how you're going to differentiate yourself from the competition. You need to look at the risks, the uncertainties, the dependencies. You need to look at all of these things in order to determine whether you are going to achieve the goals which you've set out for yourself to do. Now, that is a numbers game at the end of the day, and none of these kind of categorizations that are being used by the appellant have got numbers associated with them. They use the same broad numbers that I do in terms of overall supply, overall demand, but there's no breakdown. So there's no segmentation of the market. There's no understanding about the demand for the different segments. It's not a credible business plan, in my opinion. And I have written many business plans and analyzed many business plans. And whilst this isn't a business plan, one would expect it to reflect the kind of information that would have been put into a business plan, and there's no indication of that.
If we just go to paragraph 4.15 of your proof. This is where you say, Mr. Kershaw, the appellant has not provided clear details about the studio requirements of blockbusters and major film and HGTV production which it is targeting, nor provided a survey of existing studios that could support those requirements. Is that the concern that you were raising just now?
That's exactly the concern.
The important question, why should the inspector be concerned?
Because I'm kind of jumping ahead a bit, but because the assumption is, so let's start again. So I don't think there's any disagreement between me and the appellant's witnesses that there's a large supply at the moment, and there is the demand for it. The demand for it is less than the supply. Sorry, I'm bottling myself up there. I don't believe that we disagree that the supply of studio space exceeds demand. I don't believe that, and I'm sure Mr. White will pick me up on that if that's not the case, but I don't believe that is the case today. The question is, what's going to happen in the future? And again, we'll come on to forecast in the future later, but the point is that what the appellant has done is to take a particular segment of the market, the large-scale blockbuster productions, and said, we're going to focus on those. And we're going to not only focus on those, we're going to enable the UK to get more of them. We're going to increase the UK's market share by taking those productions from the US, because Marlowe Film Studio has the characteristics which will enable it to do so. Now, okay, that's if that's their aim, that's their aim. I don't think it's reasonable, but what is certainly not reasonable is that they've not quantified what this demand is, what this market opportunity is, and therefore it's not credible, in my opinion, that they have got a justification which is based on something which has not been quantified.
Thank you. I'd like just to start touching on questions of forecasting.
Okay.
Do you remember? Well, let's just get the reference up first. Actually, be easier if we go to page 20 of the Knight Frank report. And this is a graph of UK spend on film and HGTV.
Can you give me the paragraph number?
It's 2.3.8 of the Knight Frank report, and it's a table.
Yep.
It's on page 20.
Yep.
And do you remember earlier, Mr. Kershaw, that this graph rather, was the subject of some questioning and some discussion between Mr. White and Mr. Fannin?
Yes.
And the question was, well, essentially that, well, this graph shows that there has been a bounce back.
Yes. You want me to comment on that?
Yes,
yeah,
please.
Okay. Well, there has been a bounce back, and how could there not have been when production almost ground to a halt during the strikes. So yes, it has bounced back, and this year will be better than 2024 will be better than 2023, and 2025 will be better than 2024. However, the question is not the relative annual spend, it's the growth in spend over the next few years, and whether that is going to grow at a sufficient rate to result in the demand for studio space catching up with supply. So yeah, this is BFI figures. They're obviously quite correct, but there's another graph that was shown.
Just if we could
All right,
pause
sorry.
just on that one
Yes.
for a moment. You do analyze this graph and comment on it yourself, don't you, in your proof?
Ah, yes, I do.
And it's from paragraph 3.10 onwards of your main proof of evidence.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah.
And if you could, Mr. Kershaw, essentially using the analysis you've done of this graph, just walk the inspector through your analysis in light of Mr. White's discussion with Mr. Fannin, and the suggestion that we're in a kind of bumper year situation.
Okay. So the first figure 27 just shows the annual expenditure over the last 10 years, and it shows the huge jump in expenditure in 2021, 2022 associated with the peak TV period, and the big drop in 2023 associated with the strikes in Hollywood. Then the next graph in 311 shows that big jump in 2021, 2022 was almost entirely due to a big increase in HETV spending, and HETV spending means spending by streaming companies, Netflix, Amazon, etc. So they were the ones that caused that big jump. And as I explained previously, this was part of the streaming wars, and they were fighting for market share, fighting for market expansion. So those two graphs are useful for that purpose. Then we look at 2024. Now, 2024 full year figures haven't come in yet.
Are we still in that same figure 28, or have you moved
No, I'm sorry, we moved on to 29, figure 29.
over the page?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so 2024, this graph here is just Q1 to Q3, and it shows there has been a pickup. Yep.
That is essentially the same as the Knight Frank graph. This one that you've produced is figure 29, is it?
Let me just go back to the Knight Frank one.
Ish or not?
Well, not quite, because his shows full years for 2016 to 2023 and only year to date for 2024, whereas my graph shows the Q1 to Q3 for each of those years.
So that's similar to the Lambert Smith Hampton graph then?
Which one?
The one in the... Yeah.
Yeah. I think so, yes. Do you want me to
CD92.
see? I'll check it, yeah.
The update, December update one.
Right. CD92.
There's just a lot of graphs, so I'm just making sure that I'm...
I like graphs. So.
I can tell.
Yes, that's exactly that. That is the same. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so that shows that Q1 to Q3 has picked up in 2024, but then the BFI also produce quarterly reports which show the rolling 12-month expenditure from each quarter. So the latest Q3 2024 report shows the previous 12 months expenditure, and I've taken previous reports to get the equivalent expenditure in the previous year. So basically, it's October to September for these years, 2019 to 2020 to 2021, etc. And what this shows is that since the writers' strike in 2023, the expenditure on feature film production has recovered to levels which are comparable with previous years, whereas the expenditure on HETV, i.e. the expenditure of streamers, has continued to decline. And that, I think, reinforces what I was saying before about the bubble in the streaming bubble having burst now, the expenditure on English language content having been reduced. And the question is, how much will it recover? Is this lag of, is this reduction in HETV expenditure going to recover slower than the expenditure on film? I don't know. It might do. Maybe HETV takes longer to recover. It's still got some time to unwind. That's why 2025 is no doubt going to be better than 2024. But the question is how much? And the bigger question is how much over the longer term? And we'll come on to that in a minute, I think, won't we?
It's when you say it's got time to unwind, just what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, productions were delayed, and then, you know, they've got to reschedule everything, get all the stars and the talent lined up, and, you know, it takes a while before things which have been greenlit are actually ready to go into production. So it takes a bit longer. Yeah.
Thank you. So, well, we'll move on now to forecasts, look to the future now, and get into matters of production spend and forecast demand. And I'd like to go to your rebuttal proof, please, Mr. Kershaw, where you deal with this point.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just looking, comparing these two graphs before you carry on.
Yes.
Please.
I still don't really get it. I'll just be really honest. I don't get how you've got I don't get the difference. Do you know what I mean? No, maybe you don't, but I don't.
I do. The first graph, 29, is just for 3 quarters of the year, from January through till September. The second graph is showing from October the previous year through to September. So the first graph is just 9 months. The second graph is the last 12 months. Yeah?
Yeah.
All right.
So that's the only difference, essentially.
That's the only difference. But I think it's useful because, you know, 3 months, 3 quarters of expenditure is not as a useful a kind of indicator as the full 12 months. So that the longer period you've got, the more likely it is that the data is indicative.
Is that clear now, ma'am?
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, you can move on now.
No, not at all. No, please. So looking then at supply and forecast demand and production spend. So we'll go to your rebuttal proof, please.
Yes.
We'll go to section 3.
Yes.
I want to look at more charts.
Lovely.
So I'd just like to talk the inspector through how you've done your forecasts. And I mean, the first point just to note is at the start of paragraph 3.1, you're in alignment, aren't you, with Mr. Chodarovich on forecast growth rate?
I think it's a reasonable forecast. I would note that I have a reference to a forecast from a guy from Ampere Analysis. Ampere Analysis is one of the analyst companies who focuses on the media space, and there's a report on a guy Bisson from there who estimates that the growth is only going to be 0.2%. over the next few years. I can give you that reference. Maybe
I can
Ms. Nevin can help
to
me.
it. The ampere analysis.
Yeah.
It's in your CD 13.
Yes.
Thanks for our.
Could you just answer the question though that you were asked first before you went off on a tangent?
Oh, broadly, I think it's a reasonable estimate that's workable, and I've used it as part of my analysis. Yes.
Do you want to go to the ampere?
I think it's worth.
Based on that.
I think it's worth doing because this guy, you know, is a respected commentator in the field, and you know, he has a fairly robust opinion about the future.
There are two
trying to find it.
amperes. There's CD 1323 and CD 1324. And the first one is streamers to spend 8.5 billion on sports rights. The second is Netflix,
that's not.
Amazon Drive SVOD original orders in Q1 24. Is it that one?
No. Sorry about this. It's
Miss Nevin, just you've done an hour and a half, so just seeing where you're up to in terms of.
Yeah, I
Have you got
think
about
I'm
half an
bang
hour
on where I expect to be.
Brilliant, super.
I'm subject to us finding this reference, but
yeah. It may not be titled Ampere Analysis. I think it's a report from something from Ampere Analysis said.
Does it
I'm not sure it matters
Okay.
because
Okay.
I mean, I was going to ask you, you're content to work to
Yes,
the
I am.
same sort of forecast
I am.
growth as Mr. Todorovic, the 2 to 4%
I think
growth rate.
I think it's reasonable. Yeah.
But you do have some discrepancies with the appellant's analysis, particularly those of Mrs. Evans, in terms of ratio of £1 million production spend per square feet of space, don't you? And you
Yes.
go into your differences with Mrs. Evans there from 3.2 of your proof.
Yeah. So let me take this slowly. So
Yeah, take it in stages.
So in order to do this kind of forecast,
Yeah.
no, and no one does, so it's my fault. But it is there's logic there. I just need to make sure it's clear. So what I'm trying to do is to associate production expenditure with the amount of space that's required to service that expenditure.
goes well?
Okay. So what I did was I said I took a data point. I took a time in history where I knew what the expenditure was, and I knew what the supply of stage space was. And this was in 2022 when studios were full. And I said, okay, well, if there's that much spent and there was that much space, let's assume it was all used. And then you can work out how much space is required per $1 million of £1 million of expenditure. It's a very high level, rough and ready figure, but That's too slow. Do you want it on or off? It wasn't. Oh, sorry. Supposed to be.
Do we know if we're back online? Don't actually know. There's a screen there. Oh, I've got a thumbs up. Super. We are back online. Okay. Right. The inquiry is resumed. It is 3:25. The question that we were in the middle of before was about 3.2 of you were explaining your rebuttal. So what I've got from your answer is that you associate production expenditure with the amount of space to serve that expenditure. You took 2022 as a year because the studios were full.
Yep.
And you looked at if there was that much spend and that much space, you worked out how much space is required per $1 million of expenditure.
Exactly.
Same approach as Ellie Evans. It's a high level figure, but it's a useful because anything other that segments the market is liable to have greater inaccuracies.
Exactly
That's
right.
where I got to.
Exactly
Okay.
right. So the purpose of this was to enable me to estimate the growth in demand for studio space. I needed a metric which I could use to relate expenditure to space. Now, when I wrote my original proof, I chose some what I thought to be reasonable growth estimates, but in my rebuttal, I've used Mr. Jodorovich's. And so what I've said is, okay, starting from what was agreed to be the baseline expenditure of 2024, which I've moved my position to accommodate the estimates of the appellant, starting from that base of around 6.5 million square feet. Sorry, 6.5 million pounds, billion pounds. I'm sorry, 6.5. No, I'll start again. I start from I start from the assumption that the 6.5 billion pounds will be spent on production in 2020, was spent in production in 2024. And then I take the figures of growth figures, compound annual growth rate of 2%, 3%, and 4% to see how that growth in expenditure will rise over the next 10 years. Then I convert that expenditure into the amount of stage space which is required to support that expenditure using the metric which I currently explained. And that's, So I take the 6.5 billion expenditure in 2024. I take the 2%, 3%, and 4% compound annual growth rate, and I take that 6 million and say, okay, if it grows by 2% each year, then what's it going to be in 2025, 26, 27, 28, etc. for each of the three rates? And that's what this graph shows. So it shows that and then I convert that. Yeah, I convert that into studio space using the metric that I used, that I previously derived from the 2022 figures.
Can we just pause there for a moment?
Yeah.
Because you've helpfully explained that you've aligned yourself essentially with the 6.5 billion pound figure. You've kind of found a middle ground, so to speak, between yourself and the appellant. So we understand how you arrived at 6.5 billion of expenditure in 2024. Obviously, it's important. This is all about ratio of space to expenditure.
Yes.
And your starting point there for that and space is 850 square feet per million. So I think it would help the inspector to understand how you arrived at 850 square feet as opposed to Mrs. Evans. I think it is Mrs. Evans. You say Mrs. Evans, Mr. Davis, but it's both Mrs. Evans in 3.2 and the ratio of 10,000 square feet per 7.4 million, which comes to a different ratio. So I think if we help get to the 850 square feet, I think a lot will flow from there.
I see what you mean. Well, the 850 square foot per million pounds is based on those 2022 figures. Knowing the studio space available, knowing the expenditure in 2022, the ratio can be worked out from those two numbers. And what Mrs. Evans has done is taken a reference from another planning application, which I think was for Bray or Leaves, for Bray, I think.
Nordicity and Safri Champness
and that
research.
relies on Nordicity's analysis, which says 2,000 square feet of production space is required per $1 million of production spend. So that's very different from my 850 square feet.
And you say you derived your figure from the future growth forecast in the Leavesden application.
No, I derived my figure of 850 from those 2022 figures. From those
Yes.
Sorry.
You refer to deriving the future growth forecast from the Leavesden application at paragraph 3.2.
Well, that's what Mr. Davis does. He takes the Leavesden studio planning application, and he says that 10,000 square feet is required for £7.4 million of spend, and then that's equivalent to 1,351 square feet per £1 million. So there's three different ratios in play here. There's Mrs. Evans' 2,000 feet, there's Mr. Davis's 1,351 feet, and there's mine 850 square feet. Now, I'm confident that mine is more useful, more reliable, more accurate, because if you take either Mrs. Evans' 2,000 or Mr. Davis's 1,251 and you backtest them, and what I mean by backtest is you take those ratios, you apply them to previous expenditures and calculate what the studio space availability would need to be, they don't make sense. So this is I don't know which part of my evidence. Yeah.
The point I was taking you to, Mr. Kershaw, was so you said you disagree with those ratios.
Yes.
And it's in the second paragraph of paragraph 3.2. And you said this figure is not, you're referring to the 1,351 square feet per million of production spend.
Yes.
And then you go on to comment, this figure is not supported by backtesting and contradicts the blended estimate of 1,064 square feet per metre that I derived from the future growth forecast in the Leavesden application.
Right.
So what I was trying to get to was, so, you know, your 850 square feet per metre is obviously a workup from that. I'm trying to get to the methodology you used, and you say you used the methodology in the Leavesden application.
No, I used the 2022 figures to get my ratio. The 1,064 that I calculate from the Leavesden report, and perhaps we should get that up.
That's just to help work out the methodology.
Just for me, where does this take me? What am I getting from this?
This is really important, and I'll tell you why. The reason is I want to know what the demand for studio space is going to be if Mr. Jodorowicz's estimates of 2% and 4% growth are accurate. I want to know what that means in the demand for studio space.
In the square footage for studio
in
space,
the square footage
to do with this ratio.
Precisely.
Right. Okay.
Exactly that. So he says it's going to grow between 2% and 4%. The expenditure, you can work out how that goes from expenditure of 6.5 million in 2024. Then you say, well, how much space is that going to require? I use this ratio. There's a dispute about the ratios.
Right. Okay.
And that's the key point. And once you've got that estimate of what the space requirement is, then you can look at what the space availability is, and you can see whether or not supply will support demand. And that's the kind of hub of it. Yeah. So to be honest, it's better to go over this, you know, at a desk with a spreadsheet and look through it yourself. I can talk you through it, but I am trying my best. I'm confusing myself, to be honest.
The key point to simplify it is, why should the inspector take your 850 square feet per £1 million ratio instead of Mrs. Evans or Mr. Davis's? Why should the inspector start from the point of 850 square meters? Why are you right about that, and how did you get to that?
Because it corresponds to real life figures. Because it corresponds to the 2022 figures. The figure, the ratios that Mrs. Evans and Mr. Davis used are based on other planning applications and research by Nordicity, which I believe don't stand up to scrutiny, because if you use those figures on the 2022 statistics, they result in a much higher demand for studio space than was actually available. So they result in a demand for 9.6 million square feet of studio space. That's what those ratios would result in, when there was, less than 6 million square feet available. So I just don't understand how these figures are how they can be used. They don't correspond to back testing. Furthermore, there's no evidence provided that they've ever actually been tested themselves. There's no evidence to show that they ever actually have been proven. They're estimates that are used in planning applications, but they've never actually been shown to be accurate. So I've tried to find out whether they're accurate. I've found out, as far as I'm concerned, that they're not accurate, but they've not provided any proof that they are accurate. So mine, I can stand by, I can explain why I got to it. I don't believe that they can.
And you say that you got to that ratio of 850 square feet per metre by by taking the historical data,
Yes,
by adjusting it for inflation,
indeed.
and you've put a 20% safety factor uplift on that.
Yeah, good point. So even though I thought I calculated correctly and I adjusted for inflation, I added 20% on just to be on the safe side, so that, in case, there's changes in the in the occupancy rate and things like that in the future. So I add that 20% in there in order to provide confidence that it's correct.
Okay, and forgive my ignorance, but why does it matter about the amount of square foot to the expenditure? Like, what difference does it make if the one takes up more space or less space? Like, why does that make a difference in terms of how much, you could have a tiny studio that makes a mega film, and a massive studio that makes a film that makes no money.
Exactly.
So tell me how that correlates.
That's exactly the right question, and that's why I've done it across the entire expenditure and the entire availability of stage space, because it averages all that out. If you that is the point, because the budgets of different productions vary, the types of space varies, and there's no real good, I think, rule to say a movie of budget this size requires this amount of space. It's not fixed, as I mentioned earlier. So if you take an average across the entire production, it's more indicative. No, it's a perfect question.
I'm going to move on then and just look at basically what you arrived at when you input those figures into the graph. And just check, Madam, are you content you've had an explanation of how we arrived at the 850 square feet per million?
Yeah, I'll probably reread it about 5 times. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So then just move on then. You input those figures into a graph that's at figure 2, paragraph 3.4 of your proof. And what did you arrive at when you did that exercise, Mr. Kershaw?
So sorry, paragraph 3.4 of my.
It's just over the page. It's another graph. Yeah.
Oh, the rebuttal. Oh, okay, yeah, gotcha. Okay, so that graph 3.4 shows the number of square meters of studio space that will be required up till 2035 at different levels of expenditure growth, 2%, 3%, and 4%.
So just to clarify for the inspector, that left-hand vertical axis, what's the key for that?
It's a million square meters.
Million square meters. And that represents the forecast of studio space demand from 24, is that correct?
Correct.
So can you just explain to the inspector then what this graph shows?
It just shows what I expect the demand for studio space to be. It's sort of step 1 in my demonstration that supply is sufficient to meet demand. So this is the demand. If we move to the next graph, 4.1, this is the important one. So this is that graph of demand with what the supply is. And there are three different lines. We've not really had enough time to go into what I mean by certain supply, likely supply, and supply. Going to be certainly delivered in the next 2 years, stuff which is currently being built. The likely supply is the consented studio space with some developments having been removed. So, for example, Home of Production, which we mentioned earlier, I'd already removed it because we knew it wasn't going to happen, and now we've received confirmation. Others as well, which I list elsewhere in this document, I've removed them. I should now remove Pinewood as well, because they're obviously going to make a data center there instead. But that shows what the potential likely supply of studio space is. And the one above, supply plus consented, is all of the consented pipeline. Even though some of it, like Sunset Studios, is highly unlikely to go ahead, it's in there because they've got planning permission and they could build it if they wanted to. So it's just an indication. What I don't include, and we talked about this in Mr. Fannon's evidence, what I don't include is film studios which haven't been consented yet. So the one in Denham, for example, and all these other, the ones under appeal, they're not included. If they pass, then they will be added to the certain or likely supply. So this is only ones which have been consented that I show. And what this graph demonstrates, in my opinion, is that there is sufficient supply, there's sufficient certain supply to exceed demand based on Mr. Chudvorich's forecast up until at least 2032. And if you take the likely supply, there's enough to go up to 2035. And if you take other consented stuff, which may go ahead, who knows when demand is going to outstrip supply. It's just, it doesn't appear to be likely in the foreseeable future. There is sufficient space available to meet forecast demand.
If we move then on to final few questions, Mr. Kershaw, it's you know, having weighed up supply and demand, and having just looked now at the forecast supply and the ability of the supply to meet that demand for the future.
Yes.
We obviously need to turn and have a look at the benefits now.
Yes.
And do you recall earlier that Mr. White put to Mr. Fannon that, you know, if Marlow Film Studios is built out, it must be a qualitative improvement to the West London cluster. I'd just like to ask for your observations on the extent to which it would be a qualitative improvement.
Okay, well, first of all, the West London cluster, I have difficulty with because it's not a well-defined area. It changes over time. Oh, what the hell? Sorry. And so I prefer to talk about the London and Southeast area in general. So I'll rephrase your question, if I may, to say what qualitative benefit would Marlow Studios potentially have to the west, to the London and Southeast area? It would provide more surplus space, is my conclusion. It's no doubt a very good studio, but there's no clear indication that there's a demand for more very good studios. So whilst it adds to the stock, it doesn't add to the benefits which are derived from film studios unless it's actually utilized to the extent which they anticipate.
And you touch on this point at paragraph 14.14 of your proof of evidence. And it's the last paragraph of that paragraph.
14, sorry, which one?
4.14.
4.14.
4.14. Proof of evidence.
Okay, so
And
yes.
just in that last paragraph,
Oh, I
you,
see where
you,
you're going
you
there.
sort of set out your concerns for, in the current climate, as you've described it, the impact that Marlow Film Studio would have on the Western London cluster. And could you just summarise your position on that, please?
Yeah, if you do increase the surplus of studio space, then inevitably the price per square foot is going to go down because there'll be greater competition and there'll be greater negotiating strength on the part of the film producers. So it will reduce the price per square meter, which will reduce the profitability of the studios, which will reduce their ability to invest in the kinds of upgrades and technology and facilities which I think Mrs. Ellis says is necessary for Britain to maintain its position in the international market. So it's going to be a race to the bottom as competition reduces prices and studios won't be able to turn a profit and continue to invest in the business. It will damage, in my opinion, it could, in my opinion, damage the business. And, you know, we have seen studios going bust already. We've seen the one up near Reading, whose name I've forgotten, went bust. We've seen Sunset didn't go ahead. You know, the industry is already showing damage as a consequence of this oversupply.
Miss Evans, in her proof of evidence at paragraph 4.8, discusses, well, in that section, she discusses her views on the additionality of benefits that would accrue from Marlow Film Studios. And she sets out her position that the majority of the impact would be additional.
Yes.
So what could you summarise your position, Mr. Kershaw, on the additionality of the net economic benefits and where you see that lying?
Okay, so this is the most important thing to consider. So in order for Marlow Film Studios to provide an economic benefit to the United Kingdom, it must generate economic contribution and jobs which could not be generated without it. And that is what additionality means. It means that Marlow will create additional benefits. Now, as I've explained earlier, it's a very footloose mobile business in which productions get to choose studios based on whatever criteria they decide. And if a production goes to one, if there's a surplus of space and a production goes to one studio, then the benefits will be generated from that studio. But if they could go to another studio, then that first studio is left empty, and all you're doing is transferring where the benefits are generated from. I don't know if you're familiar with the phrase a net zero game. It means that a benefit to one person is a loss to another person, and there's no net benefit. So, you know, it's just not providing, and in those circumstances, there's no additionality. Additionality is the sort of opposite of a zero-sum game. It means that if Marlow gets a production, then for additionality to be the case, it would mean that if Marlow were to get a production, it could not have gone anywhere else. Only Marlow could have hosted that. Only Marlow could have attracted the producers from the USA. Only Marlow could have generated those jobs, and only Marlow could have generated the economic contribution. If that production could have gone to another studio, then that studio could have generated those things, and there's no additionality. Understood? Great, because that's the key point.
I had no further questions for you, Mr. Kershaw. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, I understood that point completely. Right. Mr. White, are you ready to cross-examine?
I absolutely am, Mum.
Excellent. You sound almost
I've
excited
only
by
been
the
waiting
prospect.
2 hours, so I hope I would be ready.
Okay,
Right,
okay.
Mr. Kershaw.
Sir.
It's all right, you don't need to call me sir. I'm not a sir. I'm mortal, but it's very kind of you. Right, let's start off. What you seek to do, you've got two principal views. You say 1.6 of your proof, there's no need for the proposal. And your second philosophy or argument is that the economic benefits are greatly reduced. Now, I know that's not exclusive, but those are the two key points, aren't they?
Sorry, which section of my proof are we talking about here?
1.6.
1.6. Give me a moment. Yes, I say that and I stand by that.
Now, what you cannot do, I find, I'll take you to your page 55, please, of your proof.
Okay. Okay, I'm here.
Sorry?
I'm here.
I don't understand the recommended weight, because here you seem to be traversing the planning balance. The weight you give, what's the Kershaw scale? Because you don't set it out anywhere. How did you come up with these figures of limited and moderate?
I came up with them based on based on a scale of, if the studio were to go ahead, it would generate economic growth. That would be a significant weight. If I think it wouldn't generate economic growth, I give it limited. So the two ends of the scale are economic growth and no economic growth, and I don't think there will be any from this. That's why I've given it limited.
Then if that's not, let me ask the Kershaw scale. Do you have only limited and moderate, or do you have other limbs?
I do recognise significant as well. Yes, limited, moderate, and significant is probably my scale. Yes.
Okay. Now, can we then please, do you accept that the proposal is for a creative industry or not?
Yes, I do accept that.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to spend a bit of time. I've got 5 sections of the cross-examination. I'm going to spend a bit of time on you, as you can imagine, because you've given very forthright evidence in chief.
Okay.
And you've been incredibly, in your qualification experience, I want to spend some time on this, and I want to understand exactly about you, frankly, because you haven't told the inspector anything beyond 1.1 about you and your past, and you will understand. The inspector's going to have to attribute weight to your evidence against the 5 witnesses who give evidence on behalf of the appellants.
Yep.
So let's understand. As I understand it, you've been retired since December 2020. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. So you haven't worked for 4 years and 1 month.
Correct.
You had, prior to that, you had experience in technology, media and entertainment.
Correct.
What does that actually mean, please? What did you do?
I provided solutions for companies that delivered television content via streaming, via cable, and via satellite television.
Oh, sorry, I'm joining the inspector. I don't understand. Can you speak in English? What are solutions? I mean, we all try and provide solutions. What does that mean in English? What did you do?
I worked in product management. Are you aware what product management means?
I haven't got a clue.
Okay. I worked. Can I explain what the companies I worked for
That's
did?
exactly what I want you to do.
Oh, you said what I did, not what the companies did. I'll tell you what the companies did then.
Well, I don't mind. What I just want in English.
Just tell me what you did in English, basic, if as if I was a kid.
The companies I worked for provided technology to enable, for example, Sky to provide their television service. So the set-top box, the back end that enables the set-top box to work, the encryption, the condition, all the technological components to enable Sky to deliver their services was provided by my company, or a large part of it.
Okay.
Similarly, we provided solutions for companies like Netflix, not Netflix, but like Netflix, to deliver over-the-top services, streaming services.
Okay, so let's now deal with what you didn't do. Have you
Okay.
ever been involved or worked at a film studio?
No.
Have you ever produced a film?
No,
Have you ever produced an independent film?
I have not.
Have you?
Slow down.
Sorry, yes, fair point. Have you ever sought financing for a film?
No,
Have you ever sought financing for an independent film?
no,
Have you ever worked on a film?
no,
Have you ever financed a film?
no,
Have you ever been an angel for a film?
no.
Have you ever carried out an economic benefits assessment?
What's that? What's an angel?
An angel is an investor in either a film or a fit. It's
Thank you.
the name of people who will invest in.
I will ask if I don't know.
No, no, do ask.
Letting you all
Do
know.
ask. Do ask. Have you ever carried out an economic benefits assessment?
Yes,
You have. Okay. For your companies.
yes,
Great. Have you got any planning qualifications of any kind?
no. Planning in the sense of this inquiry, you mean?
No, no, planning qualifications. Have you ever studied planning? Have
No,
you-
no, no, not at all. No.
Okay, fine. Now, let's then spend a moment on this issue, what you set out at 1.3 and 1.4 particular. Now, we've heard Mr. Sherwin last Friday and we've heard you in chief. I just want to make it absolutely clear. You see, first of all, tell me, have you signed an NDA with Shinfield?
No,
Well, I just don't understand then why at 1.4 you didn't set out and weren't clear with the inspector that you'd had contact with and meetings with Shinfield, which wasn't subject to any NDA. Why didn't you think that was relevant to identify that you had had contact and meetings with Shinfield?
I just didn't. I didn't think it was relevant. I explained that I'd spoken to industry insiders. And I thought that was sufficient.
Okay, you thought that was sufficient. How many, let's make this clear then. When was your last meeting with Shinfield?
I will get that up.
You know, I'm starting chief.
I did actually. I mean, I met them face to face in 13th of September 2024
At Shinfield?
at Shinfield Studio
You
itself.
also had a tour, did you, of Shinfield?
Yes, he gave me a tour.
Is your judgment that Shinfield Studios were a competitor or not of the appeal proposal?
Well, it's a good question. I think they are, but I'm not sure the appellant thinks they are.
Yeah, I'm not asking about the appellate. I'm asking your view.
I'm giving a little bit more information.
No, I don't. No, can we please make this straightforward? Can you answer the question I asked you?
I
I
did.
don't need. Yes, you do accept your judgment is Shinfield's a competitor of the proposal.
Yes,
Thank you. Do you think Pinewood is a competitor of the proposal?
not right now.
Okay. Now, I'm going to put it to you. We know from Mr. Sherwin that he met Pinewood. He admitted an open inquiry.
No, he didn't.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
I
Right.
don't think he did.
All right. Well,
We don't need to argue.
Okay, we don't need to argue. There's a record in it. Did you meet Pinewood?
I have never met Pinewood.
You've never met Pinewood. I thought you said well, who's you signed the NDA with then?
I'm not telling you.
Well,
It wasn't Pinewood, I can tell you that.
Oh, so there's a third studio you've been in contact with.
Yes.
So, Save Marlowe's Greenbelt have been in contact with Shinfield, which you admit. Secondly, Mr. Sherwin's been in contact with Pinewood. And thirdly, there's a third studio you've been in contact with.
I don't know how to prove this, but I don't believe Mr. Sherwin said that he'd been in contact with Pinewood. But I can tell you who from our organisation has been in contact with Pinewood, and that's Mrs. Crabtree. Her connection with Pinewood is not a visit there. It's a discussion with Andrew Smith, who is the corporate affairs director, I think. And that was in a capacity as a Liberal Democrat candidate for the Beaconsfield constituency. She met him at a Lib Dem conference where he introduced himself, I understand. So that's the contact that my organisation has had with Pinewood. I do not believe Mr. Sherwin has ever spoken to anyone from Pinewood.
Okay.
Can I just ask where this is going? please.
No, I'm sorry, you can cover it. Mum, I'm sorry, it's critically important.
Okay.
I'm sorry, in the light,
You don't need to apologise. I just want to know where it's going.
I'll tell you where it's going, that I'm going to make the submission in closing that you should give no evidence to this witness whatsoever because he has no expertise to give the evidence he's given to you. And I'm just finding out whether there's any other expertise who's had an input into his proof.
Okay.
Now, we've got the position that Shinfield you met in September 24.
Yes,
Mr. Sherwin also mentioned a visit to studios in December 24. Which one's that?
that's the one I can't disclose.
What, you've signed an NDA with them?
Correct.
And the NDA, I'm going to put to you that you're completely mischaracterizing. The NDA you says you cannot reveal that you have basically been to the studio because we've seen the Pinewood NDA. It says nothing of the sort.
You've not seen this NDA.
Okay, so your evidence is there's a third studio. You see, Mr. Kershaw, I'm going to tell the inspector in the clearest terms. I've never had this position before where a witness seeks to give evidence to the Secretary of State and refuses to say who the source of their evidence is. That's your position, isn't it?
The position was forced on me.
Well, no, it wasn't. You didn't need to sign the NDA.
I wouldn't have got a meeting with the guy if I hadn't.
Well, that doesn't, you could have tried to get meeting elsewhere, but you put yourself in a position where it is impossible for the Secretary of State to know what extent of your information is supplied by.
That's not correct, Mr.
No,
White.
I haven't finished the question, Mr. Kershaw. I
Go
haven't
ahead.
finished it. Shall we do it that I won't finish the question and you just answer what you think the question might have contained, or shall I ask the question you answer?
Go ahead.
Thank you. We are in a position now where you have received information from a studio that you refuse to tell this inquiry which studio it is. Don't you?
Correct.
Yeah. And it's impossible for the inspector and the Secretary of State to know whether 1% or 100% of your evidence comes from that undisclosed source.
That was the question I was anticipating. And my answer is as follows, and it's clearly stated in my proof that such information is identified as anecdotal. Clearly.
I don't understand what does that mean?
That means that you can rely on the evidence which is not anecdotal as being from the source of my analysis. Only that information which I've identified as being anecdotal could be associated with the studio, which I'm not going to name.
Is the studio that you're not going to name, do you consider it a competitor of the appellant or not?
I don't think it is.
Okay, so it's not. Okay. You don't think it is?
Well, it's not what the appellant calls a grade A studio. So I think probably not in their view.
No, but I'm asking you. I don't stop. Forget about the appellants. This is about your evidence.
Okay, fair point.
You obviously felt it was relevant. You had a meeting with the studio in December 24. You clearly felt they could assist or provide information to assist your evidence at this inquiry, didn't you?
I did.
And you signed an NDA that refuses to tell the Secretary of State and the inspector which that studio is.
Correct. But I've identified any information which may have come out of that meeting as anecdotal, and then she can decide to dismiss that information should she so wish.
Well, she can't, because she doesn't know where the information's come from. I mean, it might have come from, I might have had a studio, it might be my garage as a studio. We have no idea. We know nothing. You're not willing to tell the inquiry what this studio is, Mr. Kershaw.
Correct, I'm not, but I have explained that any information I got from those meetings with that studio is identified as anecdotal. And you can see from that it's not has a very little bearing on my case. It's purely background, it's purely data in order to make sure that my assumptions and arguments are correct. I think you're wrong to make this
I'm never right or wrong. Forget me, Mr. Kershaw. It's not personal, but it's an extraordinary position that you, as the lead member of your organisation, seek to give evidence on need, and you will not disclose the source of your evidence, frankly.
Okay, well, I have nothing to say on that anymore.
Okay, fine. You don't have anything, but I've given you a chance to. That's the submission I'm going to make. Let's not quite leave that. Have you talked to anyone else in the film business?
Yes.
Who?
I don't remember their names, as I explained when I gave my examination in chief, that I met a number of people from the film industry through my activities within Save Marlowe's Greenbelt, both pro and anti the studio, who were had various roles, film producers, cameramen, lighting guys, a whole variety of different sorts of roles.
Whole variety. How many are we talking about? These mysterious conversations?
I'd say there's probably about a dozen.
A dozen.
Yeah,
Again, who are they? Who are the dozen? Do you remember that film, The Dirty Dozen?
I do.
Yeah, exactly. Who are the Dirty Dozen?
I said I can't remember their names because I don't think these were conversations had in the street. I didn't take down their details. They said, you're against Marlowe Film Studios. I disagree with you, or I agree with you. Here's why. We had a conversation in which I gathered more information about the film industry.
All right. Well, Mr. Kershaw, I'm going to give you one chance before I move on. I'm going to make the submission, as you know, that your evidence should have no weight whatsoever, because firstly, it's dependent on an unnamed studio. Secondly, the Dirty Dozen, who you won't announce. And thirdly, you, who have never been involved in film production in any capacity ever. That's all a fair characterization of your sources, isn't it?
No.
Oh, okay. Who else are we missing?
No. I want to pick you up on one point.
Yeah.
My lack of experience in the film business is not a reason to disregard my evidence. As I explained when I was talking to Ms. Evans, this business, this need and economic benefit analysis is a business analysis. It's not really dependent on having worked at a studio, being a producer, being an angel investor, or any of those things. It's purely looking at the facts, analyzing them, drawing graphs, which I've explained I do enjoy doing, and drawing conclusions from those, which is what I've done. So I think it stands up on that basis.
Okay, that's fine. That's your view, and the inspector have a view. I'm just putting to you that I'm putting completely the counter position that I wouldn't get on a plane with someone who wasn't a pilot. And yet you're asking the Secretary of State, in simple terms, to prefer your evidence, which, as you said, you haven't spent so much as an hour producing a film or in a studios. You were saying to the Secretary of State, and the inspector might think you're right, might think, yes, I think Mr. Kershaw's right there. You're asking the Secretary of State to prefer your evidence to 5 experts who will hear the next 5 days, aren't you?
I am, and let me give you a little bit more detail on that. You'll have seen from my evidence that I make copious quotes from industry experts who are named, for example, in the parliamentary inquiry, who give their views. Now, are you saying that the Secretary of State should disregard their views? I'm not asking you a question. This is a rhetorical question. I'm saying that the evidence that I've provided provides plenty of material which is independent of my lack of experience in the film industry and independent of which studio or which person I spoke to. This is objective information that I've gathered together, analysed and presented in a form which I believe shows there is no need and no economic benefit from this studio.
We all understand that's what you think you've done, Mr. Kershaw, and the inspector will see whether you're right or not.
Indeed.
We'll see that. But let's just deal with a few other matters while we're on this moment.
Okay.
Yeah, just tell me this, because you made some quite. Yes, actually, let me just put into surface. You'll have heard. I mean, I've sat through Dave Marlowe's Greenbelt case now for 7 days, and both you and Councillor Crabshaw have done a remarkable thing. Neither of you so much as mentioned the MPPF and the latest December 2024 version. And you'll recall my passage with Mr. Fannin this morning. What do you say? Because you don't comment on it at all about need. And you're basically saying to the inspector, this proposal should be turned down on need. What do you say about the passage of the MPPF that seeks support for the creative industries? Do you say the government are right or wrong?
I can't answer because I'm not an expert in planning law and I don't have a view on it.
You have no view on the MPPF.
I have one view on the MPF, and that is the Greenbelt very special circumstances requirement, and that's what I've focused my evidence on to demonstrate that there isn't sufficient justification for very special circumstances to be applied to this case. The technicalities of grey belt, golden rules, and whatnot, that's beyond me.
Yeah, well, what I'm surprised is paragraph 86 and 87 beyond you as well. When
Hold on. What's the reference to that?
MPPF 87
So sorry, what is the CD reference to that?
is 11.1. 11.5, CD 11.5, please.
CD 11.5. And apologies, what's the paragraph number?
87, please, page 24. Tell me when you've got it.
Okay, let me just quickly read it. My opinion is it sounds reasonable, but the devil is in the detail. I don't know how to apply that recommendation to any particular case, let alone Marlowe Film Studios. And I have no other things to say than that on it.
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to ask you a bit more, because you said your conclusion, your rebuttal, dated the 14th of January after the publication of that. I continue to believe there's no need for Marlowe Film Studios. And that's in the context of the government saying planning decisions should recognise and address the specific location requirements of different sectors. This includes making provision for creative industries. So the government's planning policy in December the 12th said make provision for the creative industry.
Yeah.
Your evidence, in a nutshell, is absolutely flying against the latest expression of government policy in relation to creative industries.
Well, no, because my assessment of need is need to the film industry, need to this. This is what the appellant has put in its case, that the studio is needed by the film industry. I'm not talking with it in the context that the NPPF is talking about.
Oh, so the sensible interpretation based on your evidence is when the government talk about creative industries, that should exclude film studios.
No, I didn't say that at all.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, what did you say then?
Exactly what I previously said. I was looking at need in the context of the film industry.
Oh, so creative industries brackets footnote 44 should say not including the film industry.
No, not at all. Let me try and be clearer.
Yes, do.
The appellant, as you probably read in the appellant's submissions, they believe that the film industry needs Marlowe Film Studios. And that is the analysis that I did to determine whether that was the case or not. That is all I mean by need. I don't mean anything broader, anything to do with the NPPF, anything to do with the creative industry. I only looked at whether the film industry needs this studio. And my conclusion is it does not.
Ma'am, if this is helping you, by all means, but just to clarify, at paragraph 6.1 of Mr. Kershaw's proof, he does say an analysis of the extent to which consideration of the appeal scheme is influenced by changes to the NPPF is outside the scope of his evidence. The LPA will be relied upon to present necessary and appropriate arguments. So just to say that Mr. Kershaw has never put forward views, by all means, if this line of question is helping you, but just to put that marker down that he has made this clear.
No, he was answering the question, Mr. Neville. That's a completely inappropriate intervention. I'm sorry, it's relevant. It's relevant. I'm not allowing that intervention, ma'am, because NPPF in turn says to make provision for creative industries, and it is clear as day that Mr. Kershaw's evidence flies in the face of that, and you haven't mentioned the NPPF, and I'm asking you how that
Well,
sits.
to be fair, he has mentioned the NPPF.
Well, he
and
has,
that
but-
it's outside the scope of his evidence.
No, well, he was answering the questions perfectly happily.
And I answered it, I think, reasonably as well. My assessment of need is
You
need to the
self-marking
film
now,
industry.
Mr. Kershaw.
Say again?
Are you self-marking now?
Right, let's not bother. He said that he's assessed the need based on what the appellants have presented.
Right, let's go on then. Your position on need at page 27. You have not got that corroborated by a single other film studios, have you?
Beg your pardon, which paragraph?
Your conclusion at 6. I continue to believe there's no need for Marlowe Film Studios.
In my rebuttal?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sorry, let me
Yeah.
just double check. Yeah, I can continue to be, okay, so I accept I could have written this with more clarity. What I meant was, I believe that the British film production industry has no need for Marlowe Film Studios. I acknowledge that it wasn't precise enough, but that is what I intended.
That wasn't the question, I'm afraid.
Okay, what was the question?
question was, you have not that conclusion, you have no appendices or any comment from anyone in the film industry endorsing your judgment, do you?
Yes.
You don't.
Well, the parliamentary inquiry has people who have invested in films, who have owned film studios, and they have the same conclusion as me. So I think it's well supported.
Well, the inspector will make an inference on that, and we obviously have a different view on that. Next point.
Okay.
Criticisms. You in your evidence in chief and your proof of evidence make no criticism of the qualitative components of the film studios, do you? That it's deficient in any way as to what's provided?
Marlowe Film Studios itself, you mean? The
Yes.
quality of Marlowe Film Studios?
Yes.
No, I have no criticism of it.
Do you accept? Have you actually considered what it contains? Have you reached a view on where it will sit in the hierarchy of provision? What's your view? You've obviously studied this matter at great extent. Where do you think it will sit in a hierarchy of quality in British film studio provision?
Near the top.
Near the top. What's above it in your view, and why?
I'd say established studios like Pinewood and Shepperton, because they have the credibility and the management and the trust of the production community, so they are superior.
No, that's frankly a different point. That's market attractiveness to the market. I'm asking about the quality of the proposal. What does Pinewood and what does Shepperton have, which in your view, what do they have that's
Okay.
better than what's effectively sought planning permission, please?
In terms of the facilities that they
Yeah.
provide. Okay. They have more space. They not much really. I mean, I think they're larger, but there's not much qualitative difference in that regard. No.
Not much really. So when one puts aside market attractiveness, your evidence accepts that Marlowe will be at, or frankly, on a parity with the top of what's provided in the UK.
In terms of the facility they provide, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure that's the case.
Now, can we take up your rebuttal? I'm going to deal with a few points which I think you've got wrong. Go to page 16, please, of your rebuttal.
Okay. 16, yes.
You see above the table, you say, Mr. Chodorowitz's evidence actually demonstrates that Canada has been the main beneficiary of the US decline. Do you see that?
I do.
Could you please go to his table 16, please, in his evidence?
Table 16. Can you tell me which page that's on, please?
20.
20. Got it.
Yeah, do you see the final column, CAGR 15 to 23, UK 19%, Canada 12%. You see that?
Hold on, I'm looking at the wrong table. Table 15, you say?
Table 16.
Table 16, I'm sorry. Yeah, I see that, yeah.
The column I was taking you to was the final column, CAGR.
Yeah.
UK 19%, CAGR at 15 to 23. Do you see that?
I do.
Canada 12%.
Yep.
So Canada hasn't been the main beneficiary. UK has clearly outstripped Canada, hasn't it?
No, you made a mistake. I took his figures from his table and presented them
Yeah.
as a share of global production.
Yeah.
So I'm showing the share of global production that Canada experienced rose faster than that of the UK. Mr. Chivoritz's table is showing compound annual growth rate, not percentage of overall production.
I understand all that. I understand that, but you say who has been the main beneficiary both takes into account his evidence and yours.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're both relevant factors in
Yep.
making a judgment who the main beneficiary have. And in Mr. Chodorowicz's evidence, table 16, it clearly shows over the period, content spend against selected jurisdictions, the UK global film and TV content spend has clearly outstripped Canada, hasn't it?
The growth in it has, but the percentage of overall production spend has not. The growth in the percentage of overall production spend has not. It's just different ways of analysing the same figures.
Yes, but okay. Next point then. Let's deal with yes, this point about what's happening in the market. And have you got my learned friend's opening speech?
I don't know.
Well, what was said there, let's just deal with this. Fundamental.
It's in the ID documents.
The case that was put ID 3, para 30. In para 30, what is said? Tell me when you've got it.
Got it.
What is said in the second sentence? Indeed, much of the appellant's economic case for development relies on impressive looking statistics when taken at face value from a market at the height of the streaming bubble, a market that no longer exists. Is it your view that the streaming market is a market that no longer exists?
No.
And I think probably the reason you say that is when we look at your evidence, please. Let's just take the inspector in your first proof, please, not your rebuttal.
Yep.
And you will know what I'm taking you to. Could you go to figure 21?
You tell me which page it is, please.
Yeah, page 20, please, Mr. Kershaw.
Figure 21. Got it.
Hopefully you've got a multicolored bar chart there.
Yep.
And we can see, can't we? This is effectively SVOD subscriptions from 2018 to 2030. So there's a degree, obviously, of predictability beyond 2024, isn't there?
There is.
And in every market and geographical area, over the next 6 years, there's going to be an increase in those that subscribe to SVODs, isn't there?
There is.
Yeah. So how would you, on the basis of that, how would you characterize? And actually, we can go, let's go as well to your figure 16, page 17.
Yep.
And again, what you show by Statistica 24 from 17 to 27, the position in streaming platforms is a significant growth. From 2023, it's about 150 billion.
Yep.
And by 27, it's about 225.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I don't, unless I'm being thick and I don't understand a bubble bursting, a growth in the next 4 years from about 150 billion to 225 billion is not a bubble bursting, is it?
You've misunderstood.
Oh, sorry, I apologize.
And I make it clear in my proof that the growth in subscribers is not equivalent to the growth in expenditure on content production. The bubble bursting is about the expenditure on content production, not on subscriber growth. The two are not necessarily linked.
Of course they're not. But where do you say? So let's just look at the Kershaw world. As a result, interestingly, is it your view that overall what the streamers pay for content, both acquired content and created content, is going to reduce, notwithstanding an extra additional revenue of effectively 75 billion? They're actually going to continue to significantly, the bubble will burst in terms of what they spend on content. That's your view, is it?
It's the industry view.
Okay. Just tell me, where do you rely on? What do you rely on to show that there will be, the bubble will burst and there'll be a serious reduction in expenditure?
Okay, let me find. I have quotes in here which demonstrate that.
Yeah, go on.
Okay, look in section 3.8,
Yep. Wait, just let me get it. What page are you on now?
23.
Yeah.
As these new models take hold, last sentence in the second box, as these new models take hold, we can expect a gradual recovery in production volumes, but a more controlled and financially viable pace. While production levels remain lower for now, the groundwork being laid for a more consistent and sustainable growth in the future. So that is what I mean by the bubble bursting. The rate of growth in content expenditure in the period leading up to 2022 is no longer apparent, and it's now turned to a more sustainable level of growth. That's what I mean by the bubble bursting in expenditure.
Mr. Kershaw, to be fair to you, I mean, that is an extraordinary contention. You rely on a comment, one comment from ProdPro, Global Production Report in Q3 24. That is what a fundamental limb of your whole case is the streaming bubbles burst.
Your witnesses agree with me, Mr. White.
No, they do not.
Yes, they do. We can find quotes in Mr. Jodorowicz's and Mr. Davis's evidence that say the bubble is. They don't say in those exact words, but they say the growth in expenditure on content production has slowed. It's absolutely straight.
The growth, the overall amount spent on content will increase. If you've got a 75 billion increase in revenue, 225 billion, is it your contention 225 billion spent on subscription videos as against 150 billion currently in the next 4 years? It's your view overall that the amount of money spent on content will decline, is it?
Well, let's be careful about this, because
No, answer my question, yes or no. Do you say to this inquiry the expenditure on content will decline?
I never said that.
Okay.
I said the growth is slower, but I'd like to qualify what about this, because what I also describe in my evidence, as you will have read, that the way in which the expenditure is directed has changed. So rather than spending money on scripted English language television productions of the type which Marlowe Film Studios would host, more money has been directed to sports content, more money has been directed to animation, more money has been directed to documentaries, and most crucially, more money has been directed to non-English language production. So I do continue to maintain that the growth in English language scripted production, the type of production which Marlowe Film Studios will be serving, is going to be a lot lower than it was in the period leading up to 2022.
What conversations have you had with Netflix putting your evidence together?
None.
Paramount Plus,
None.
Disney Plus,
None.
Comcast,
None.
Warner Brothers,
None.
Google,
None.
Apple,
None.
Amazon Prime.
None.
Thank you.
But can I expand on that point? I've read their press release, I've read their financial statements, and I've read analyst reports, which I've included within here. I think that that provides sufficient clarity on where their direction is.
Now, next point, let's go to your 3.14, please, of your main proof.
Okay. Yep.
The recent peak TV surge in HETV production is clearly over. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now let's go to your figure 32, please, over the page.
Yep.
Now, again, you say that what you show in your figure 32, this is interesting because on the narrative of what you're saying, on the Kershaw forecast growth in demand for UK studio space.
Yeah.
On every scenario you look at, we've got 10 years, haven't we?
Yes.
We've got 3 different scenarios, 3%, 5%, 8%.
Yep.
You show, therefore, 30 different forecast figures, don't you?
Yep.
Every single one shows growth over the next 10 years.
Obviously they do. There's 3, 5 and 8% growth built into it.
Yes.
But that's just
Oh,
an
sorry,
illustration.
Mr. Kershaw, I'm sorry. Sorry, please forgive me. misunderstanding what the table. You chose to set out what you forecast the future would have.
I gave 3 indicative numbers.
Yes, and in the Kershaw world, the only thing you think is the only evidence you give is 30 scenarios of growth over the next 10 years.
Let me be clear. I make it.
Can I have a yes or no? And then you can be clear.
Say the question again then.
Yes, you set out 30 future forecasts for the Secretary of State Inspector. 30.
No, the answer is
Ev-
no. The answer is no. I
Oh,
don't.
is
They're
it?
not forecasts. They're illustrations.
Oh, Mr. Kershaw. Figure 32, forecast growth in demand for UK studio space, comma, Kershaw.
Yeah. Let me find a statement earlier that I make. Give me a moment. I say consequent, and this is the 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph in 314, last penultimate sentence. Consequently, the future growth in demand for UK studios is expected to be low. However, given the variability of factors and the possibility of extraordinary events, I consider that a low, medium, and high CAGR of 3, 5, and 8% to be a reasonable basis for the forecast. So this is giving different alternative illustrations of 3, 5, and 8%. I don't say this is what's going to happen. It's a forecast in the sense that it's let's say a model, but it's not saying I believe that any of these figures is necessarily true. And you'll see in my rebuttal that I concede to Mr. Chodorowicz that 2 to 4% is probably a likely growth.
Okay, so now 31 forecasts.
Yeah.
Every single one contains growth over the next 10 years.
Indeed, it does.
Okay, so let's go back to basics, Mr. Kershaw. Every scenario you've chose to parade before the Secretary of State and the Inspector shows growth over the next 10 years. Not just growth, considerable growth, between 2% and 8%. Don't you? You don't have a single year of decline, do you?
No.
So frankly, how you can sit there and say there's no need in an industry, which is your prediction, is that growth could be as high as 8% per annum for the next 10 years.
But that's one based on the extraordinary events, as I say. Like, for example, if the fires in Hollywood had burned down all the studios, then the UK would have done a lot better, maybe got 8 to 8%. But this is just, indicative modelling, whose purpose is not to provide a prediction of the future, whose purpose is to show, given these 3 data points, what is the likelihood that that demand will exceed supply.
Now, we've had your 31 different scenarios. You have not sought to have once put the future of a decline in the amount of floor space required, have you?
No.
Okay, great. Next point. Let's just look at supply.
Okay.
Go to your 2.7, please.
Got it.
You say at 2.7, the supply of studio space continues to rise.
Yes.
However, some developments have recently been put on hold due to fears of oversupply in the UK market.
Yes.
Then you list over page 11 and 12, you've got 6 sites. Now I'm going to put to you that your conclusion at 2.7 is not supported or corroborated by evidence. You say that some developments have been put on hold due to fears of oversupply. Now, the evidence you give, not one of those has been put on hold due to oversupply. What Pine would say and what Andrew Smith says in the little box,
Yeah.
that Pinewood were adopting a more prudent approach to expansion. and would only expand if there was excess demand from customers and they were confident of market stability.
Yeah,
The shortage of skills was also a key issue.
yeah.
No, not yeah.
Excess of supply, excess of demand means demand exceeding supply. What else does it? Of course, it means that.
Yeah, no. Well, the inspector will have a view on that. And I also want to say, you said 3 times in your examination, Chief, oh, Pinewood have decided to go for a data centre. No, they haven't. You completely misread this news review.
I never said that in my evidence.
You
Does that-
did. I got a note of it. You said
Pinewood
three-
Data Centre, I did not. Show me the evidence that I said that. I did
Well,
not say that
well,
because the news only.
Can we
came out
stop
today.
arguing? You did say something about data centres.
Today? I'm not. In
Yeah,
my proof of
that's what you
evidence.
said in your evidence in chief.
in your evidence, Chief.
I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
My mistake.
Can we just maybe just both take a breath, because you both get a bit irate and there's really no need for it. So
I
Bed.
assure you, Mum, I'm not
Thank
at
you.
all irate. I'm actually
Well-
enjoying myself.
So am I, Mr. White.
Good.
well, I'm
Mr.
glad you
Kershaw.
both are. But
Good. Let's just deal with this. This is nothing whatsoever as you sought to portray it. All that's happened is Pinewood have announced a public consultation. They've made no decision at all. Do
Correct.
you understand what a public consultation is?
I do.
And I assume it's a process by which you take views into account in deciding what you're going to do. It's pretty
Correct.
pointless having a public consultation if you've already made your decision, isn't it?
Actually, I don't know what a public consultation is. I assume that they've made the decision and they want to get the views of the public on that decision. I don't know. I'm not a planning expert.
Right, okay. Well, all right, if that's, so you think it would be a credible public consultation to already made a decision and effectively you're just going through a process?
we are.
Are we on?
No, we're on. Sorry.
We
Yeah.
can continue.
Yes,
Yeah,
we
I'm
can,
just-
Okay.
continue, Mr. Kershaw.
Problem with the live stream.
We absolutely can.
Okay. I think they're minded, but how I read it, they are minded to deploy a data center on site, but they've not decided to do it yet.
And the minded to do something, you take that purely from ID 81, do you?
Yeah.
See, where do you reach that view when they say that all they say about that is what David Conway says, we're a dynamic business, blah, 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 blah. It's triggered a review.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a review is not a decision. They're doing a review of what to do, aren't they?
But they identify a data center as an option.
An option.
Yeah.
Exactly. Point 1. Point 2, Sunset Studios is on hold that you say.
Yes.
And again, where does that say anything about your contention over supply? You have no idea why Sunset Studios is on hold.
I'm making it.
Sorry, let me finish.
Sorry.
That reference also says nothing. As we move forward to the next phase, we've been assessing the current climate and intend to continue once market rates and construction finance stabilise.
Mhm.
Yeah, where do you justify your
My
comment?
judgment is that this is a nice statement to keep everyone happy, but in reality, the investors have pulled out. That's my judgment.
Okay, again, your judgment, having not raised £1 ever.
I beg your pardon.
Or
I've
have
raised,
you? Have you? Sorry. Have
Yeah.
you raised?
yeah,
Not for film studios.
not for film studios. No, of course.
Next point, C. Ashford International. A huge question mark now hangs over the project as bosses say the 4 potential operators interested in the scheme have all failed to provide a viable business proposition. That's got absolutely nothing to do with demand and supply. That's it.
I think it has. I mean, a viable business proposition means there's a demand for the studio.
Point D. Wickham Film Studios is under new ownership. Stage 50 went into administration.
Yeah.
You've got no idea. What do you know about their financial position? You know nothing about their financial position whatsoever. That's got nothing to do with oversupply, has it? A business going bust, you simply have no idea why they did, do you?
I don't, but again, I made a judgment based on my understanding of the overall market dynamics that they could not see how they could make a profit out of a film studio and consequently went into administration. Similarly, they sold the Wickham Film Studio as a consequence of that. It's a judgment. I agree. There's nothing explicit in what they've said, but that's my judgment.
Okay, ID 82. Let's also look at home of production again.
Yes.
It's for sale. With some of the land being marketed as a site for data center construction. How can you reach a judgment on that effectively as evidence of oversupply? That's a reflection potentially of the respective values of data centers against film studios, isn't it?
That's one interpretation. It's not my interpretation, though.
Well, what's your interpretation there?
That they looked at the film studio business and they figured that there's an oversupply and it's not worth building the studio because they wouldn't make any money out of it.
Your interpretation.
My interpretation.
And let's look at what's actually said in the news article you put into the inquiry, or your party did today on ID 82, and what's said about it.
Mhm.
And again, construction on a new film studio has been halted after the developer behind the project closed down. Plans for the home of production studio near Stewartby were approved, blah, 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 blah. And then we see work paused. Katja Baker, who was paid by Verb Create Holdings as a consultant on the project, said her role was to secure funds and planning consent, which she achieved, but after a week after it's granted, she was told to stand down. And then what she actually says, she added, ultimately, the decision was called by the investor behind Verb and ISG on matters unrelated to the studio arena. So that's directly contradicts your evidence about oversupply, doesn't it? This doesn't support your case.
It doesn't contradict it. It maybe it's a weak support for it, but it doesn't contradict it.
What you think when she says on matters unrelated to the studio arena, that doesn't mean it's effectively nothing to do with supply or demand. If you're unrelated, the reason the investor pulled the plug was unrelated to the studio arena. You think that might still be about supply, do you?
I don't think it demonstrates that the studio arena is positive. I just think it's maybe what she was told to say. I don't know. I find it strange.
She said what she was told to say.
I don't know. It's not strong evidence for the case, but it's an indication that what looked like a very similar studio to Marlowe's failed to go ahead because, in my view, the investors decided it was a bad idea. That's my interpretation.
Yeah, your interpretation.
Yeah.
You've had no discussions with the home of production.
Never.
No. Let me just ask you this. Do you take the view that the Quest pit near Stewartby and its location, has it got the same attractiveness to the market as Marlowe in terms of Western Cluster or not? Do you take the view that that site sits within the Western Cluster, or you have no view on it?
Well, I don't really believe in the Western Cluster. It's in the London and South East Cluster, and that's all I think is important.
Okay, so you don't believe in the Western Cluster. Yes, no, I noticed that evidence, and that belief is based on what? What you've read?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. F, Crown Studios in Sunderland. Again, nothing there. In fact, oversupply, the opposite, because what they've got is funding.
Yeah.
So why is that evidence? Because remember, this all started with you saying, the whole paragraph starts with you saying, put on hold due to fears of oversupply.
Yeah, but I don't say that these bullet points are all independent evidence of that. I say the status of studios in the consented pipeline is as follows. I don't say the status of studios in the consented pipeline is as follows and demonstrates that there's the market's bust. So I think you're misinterpreting this.
All right, let's be fair to you then. I'm going to be fair to you.
Thank you.
When the inspector says some developments, the Kershaw view is some developments have recently been put on hold due to fears of oversupply.
Yeah.
I made the erroneous decision when you quoted or brought to the inspector's attention 6 studios. That was to effectively expand on the point made. You just said it wasn't. So what are the studio developments that you say have been put on hold due to fears of oversupply?
Pinewood.
That's what you say, based on that little reference.
And what he says in the parliamentary inquiry as well.
Do you think, well, I want your judgment on this.
Okay.
Do you think the Pinewood model, their perception is that Marlow is good or bad for them as a competitor? What's your judgment on that?
Right now, it's irrelevant because they've got an MLA, so it's neither a competitor or not a competitor.
Do they have a MLA on the expansion space?
Well, presumably that's why they've not expanded, so I think
Yeah.
not.
Exactly. So let me ask you that in relation to making the decision on the additional floor space. Do you think they see Marlow in competition with the additional floor space? I don't know why you're smiling. It's a perfectly relevant question, Mr. Kershaw. Is your view that the Pinewood Phase 3 competes with Marlow or not? What's your judgment on that?
My judgment is that it may compete, but I don't think the reason that they didn't go ahead is because of Marlow Studios.
May compete. I'm going to press you on that. Why only may? Why do you think it wouldn't why can't you say yes? What factors do you take into account in your judgment that it doesn't compete?
Okay, so if, for example, Disney wanted to move more production over here and extended their MLA to the new studio space, then it wouldn't be competing. That's why it's May.
Now, let's also look, could you please take up your figure 13 in your main proof, please?
13. Yes. Could I just point out that I do an updated version of this in my rebuttal?
Right, well, let's go to your update. I don't mind which we go to. Let's go to your rebuttal.
My rebuttal, I'm just trying to find the picture.
It's actually, no, the better place is in relation to, let's go to, just let me find the reference that we can do this. Yes, let's go to page 10 of your rebuttal, please.
Okay.
4.1.
Yes.
Now, this table does not even begin to consider qualitative factors, does it?
Deliberately so, correct.
Deliberately so. Well, whether it does or it doesn't, but all this shows, all you marry up is your judgment, 2, 3, 4%.
Mr. Cherivori's judgment, by the
Yes,
way.
but I'm asking you about this. But qualitatively, do you accept that what will influence people where they want to go? Because you've read the various evidence of the appellants. Do you accept the facilities, the nature of the film studio, where it is, etc., influence the choice by which producers decide where they want to go to?
Yeah, where it is and the quality of the studio design and such like. Yeah, there's these factors I mentioned quite clearly in my evidence. Yeah.
So let's get back. Do you accept Mr. Fannon's evidence this morning when I asked him about, do you recall the grade A position, that the only place which is not subject to an MLA or owned by an operator or producer of films effectively now in the Western Cluster is Shinfield?
Well, in the area defined by the appellants as the Western Cluster, yes, but not in the London and South East Cluster, which I consider to be more pertinent.
And more pertinent, do you think Dagenham has the same attraction to the market as Shinfield, Shepperton, Pinewood?
Well,
Do you think to the market Dagenham's location is an irrelevance?
yeah.
Okay. Do you think Belfast's location is an irrelevance to the market?
No.
Oh, why the difference? Because you think Dagenham's basically perceived as the London area?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you accept the proposition that those that control or have signed master leases with the operators of the studios, that gives them effectively first choice on the space that lies within those studios?
Yes, but I think it's more than that. I think it's that they are the only ones who are entitled to use that space. Although in the case of a large production company like Disney, they have subsidiaries like Marvel and whatnot that could use the space. But yeah, they are entitled to use that space 100%.
Okay. let's then, I'm conscious of the time, and hey, let's try and finish by 5. Let me do a couple of other matters. Jobs.
Yes.
Now, you're very critical, obviously, of the various evidence given by the appellants, and particularly Miss Evans, on jobs. So I just want to turn that, and we'll obviously explore those with her evidence. But first of all, I want to ask you, you've seen the nature of the proposal. What do you say? Your position, let's just go to 5.2 of your evidence, please.
5.2. Got it.
So let's just have a look at this. You think at 5.2, you say it's questionable whether Marlow would cause an overall increase in employment.
Correct.
So you're questionable, and that's your view that, right, 1.7 million jobs, 1.7 million square feet. Do you take the view that all the jobs will effectively be diverted from existing facilities, or is your view that effectively Marlow will sit rotting empty? Tell me.
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Okay, let me go back. What do you say will happen if permission is granted? I want to go into the Kershaw world.
Okay.
Because you make a submission here that you make various submissions about what will happen. And effectively you think the appellants have over-egged the benefits. I understand all that. I want to go to the Kershaw world so I see your vision and your insightfulness of what will happen. What's going to happen if planning permission is granted in your view?
Well, first of all, they're going to have to find someone to put up 750 million quid to develop it, which I think is going to be a big challenge for them. That's first point. Second point.
Sorry, let's take it in stages. 750 million. I mean, Mr. Kershaw, do you see the ambition of that view? You have not raised £1. I've raised as much money as you for film studios. How do you have any view? Have you ever gone to anyone seeking money for film studios?
No.
And yet you feel you can opine on their likelihood or not of raising the money?
Yeah.
Okay. Second point you were about to make. Your second point, what happened? Let's imagine that you're wrong and they raise the 750 million.
Yep.
And the studios is built out.
Yep.
And they might, in an act of generosity, name a building after you, the Kershaw building.
Okay.
What's going to happen then? This lovely brand new studios is open. What do you think's then's going to happen?
I think that it will attract productions, but it will take the productions away from other studios like Shinfield, like other studios. I don't know what the occupancy rate will be. I doubt that they will have sufficient occupancy to be viable. Commercially viable. That's my opinion.
And that is based on what?
Well,
let me just finish.
Sorry.
No, just let me. You accept that this proposal is at the very top of the tree in qualitative provision?
Yep.
You have no idea about its proposed charging structure, do you?
Yeah.
No, you don't.
Well, it's going to be okay. I can tell you what I think will be rational for them to do, but I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, they might do something irrational. It wouldn't surprise me.
I'm not going to rise to debate at 10 to 5 along those lines. You have no idea. Well, you know, we've dealt with the quality, so it's now built.
Yes.
And you take the view, you think it's likely to remain empty, basically.
I didn't say that. I didn't say it would be empty. I would say that it would probably get some productions, but that would represent a loss of a production elsewhere. It may get some productions on the merits of its design and its qualities, which wouldn't go elsewhere. But I don't think it would be a substantial contribution in terms of either jobs or GBA.
What jobs? Let's imagine just on the scenario that it is occupied.
Yeah.
And you've obviously got Miss Evans has given the figures, the range. Let me just ask you, what do you say will be created by 1.7 million square foot? You've obviously thought about this. What do you say the number of jobs that will be created are? But
no, I don't.
You don't. You've got no view.
No, I don't know how to calculate it. All I know is that the way it's being calculated is it doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
Well, and you, Mr. Kershaw, don't you see the extraordinary submission comment you've just made?
No,
You just said, I don't know how to calculate it.
right.
And yet
But I
you
know,
feel, you, just let me
Sorry.
finish. So you acknowledge you have no idea how to calculate job creation, and yet you feel able to criticize and say they don't make sense, Miss Evans, and yet you don't know how to do the exercise.
it's possible to know not how not to do something, but also to know how it shouldn't be done. Perhaps no one knows how to calculate jobs, and Mrs. Evans' approach is not reasonable. But just because I don't know how to do it doesn't mean that anyone knows how to do it. Every single film studio planning application, and I've looked at a lot, they all use this assumption that space equals jobs. You create the space, jobs will come, which is nonsense, in my opinion.
Okay, nonsense in your opinion.
Yeah.
What? Let's go into the Kershaw world. Go and transform, revolutionize the planning system and help us all out. Tell us the Kershaw doctrine for judging jobs in the future. How would you do it?
A market analysis business plan, how everyone does it.
You're wrong. You're wrong about that. You're
Go on.
completely wrong, because you've seen, as you say, the Evans approach is what is utilized to assess how many, the density. That's an HCA document. That's a Ministry of Housing and Local Government document. The ratio approach is what is conventionally used in all planning applications, isn't it?
To me, okay, I don't know. I've not looked at all other planning applications, but I can tell you what that does tell you is how many people it could accommodate, not how many people it would accommodate.
Okay.
And there's a big difference between those.
Okay. Just let me ask you this on your scenarios.
Yeah.
Actually, we've got, you accept the scenarios of growth, etc., in your vet. We just done that. Where do you say in the Kershaw world that growth is going to go?
To the existing studios and the ones that are, going to be delivered in the next couple of years.
Well, delivered. Well, hang on. Because how is that? You take the view then that there will be delivery of studios in the future.
Yeah.
How is that compatible with your other counter philosophy that basically there's oversupply in the market? Are there too many lemmings effectively in the film industry? They're still going to jump over the cliff, notwithstanding that there's oversupply.
No, but if you look at my no is the answer. But if you look at my graph,
Yeah. Where are you? Tell me where
I'm
you are.
trying to find it. Sorry,
don't
I'm
worry.
hopeless at finding things. It was the graph you wanted to look at before, 2.3 in my rebuttal.
Thank you.
So I look at 2024, what I believe the capacity of studio space in the UK is 6.7 million. Then 2025, I had 501.
Yeah.
Based on a studio that's almost complete. In 2026, another one that's almost complete. In 2027, what Leavesden say they're going to do, and that is what I consider to be secure growth. Now, the rest of it, the likely consented, are those which, in my view, are likely to go ahead, based on my assessment of their plans. The all consented includes that, plus those which I don't think are going to go ahead, but there is planning permission available. So that's the basis on which I make that judgment.
Okay, so likely consent. It is your judgment that people out in Britain in the future are going to develop 2 million square feet of studio space in an oversupplied market.
That's right. I mean, that's what it. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Ma'am. That's my cross-examination.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any interested parties objecting? Not objecting. Since in support, want to ask any questions of Mr. Kershaw? Do you want to ask questions? Yeah. You probably need a mic. So do you want to sit at the end there? There's a microphone there. Could you give me your name, please?
Hi, so my name is Guy Mannerings. I'm an independent producer and director. My experience is in producing and directing independent films, going to film markets.
Mr. Bannering,
Yeah.
I want you to ask questions, not tell me about yourself, please.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I had more of a statement on a couple points that were made on so-called content bubble and the suggestion that the UK film industry is being in decline. Is that okay?
It's not really the time for statements because I've heard from interested
Okay, no
parties.
worries.
This is the time to ask questions of this witness on his evidence that he's just given. So if you've got questions, please fire away. If you don't, then I don't know when I need to hear from you because I have sort of heard from most interested parties at this point. Rule 6, Council, have you got any concerns about me hearing another statement?
Just to the extent that obviously I've heard a lot of statements so far in support and against.
Yep.
And I've obviously designed my evidence in chief to try and bring out Mr. Kershaw's evidence to the best I can.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want further statements at this stage. I think we're past that stage yet. And by all means, if Mr. Mannering has questions for Mr. Kershaw, I do think we're past the point of statements.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bird?
Madam, in your hands as far as the council.
Okay, thank you. There has been opportunity to submit statements, and this witness has already given his evidence now. So I'm happy for you to ask questions, but I don't think the time now is for additional statements to be given. I think you already have spoken as well, haven't you? I've already heard from you.
Yes, the
Yeah.
other day, yeah.
Okay, so have you got any questions?
I wouldn't have it as a question, no, sorry.
Okay, right, then
Thank you.
I shall move on.
Yeah.
Okay. So I had questions about 3.2 of your rebuttal, which I think I have now got to grips with.
Okay.
Then I had, and let me just bring it up because I've got 4.9 graph explain, and I don't know whether it has been explained. So let me just bring it up and see if we are there. Trying to find 4.9. Yeah, we've gone through that graph because you picked it up in cross-examination. And then I had something about 5.3 in your rebuttal as well. Yeah, you said that the assumption that space equals jobs is flawed. I know that it has just slightly been covered, but can you just explain that in a little bit more detail for me, please?
Okay.
Sorry, ma'am, I missed the question. I'm sorry. What was that?
5.3 rebuttal talks about the assumption that space equals jobs is flawed, and I'm just looking to understand a bit more about why that is so flawed. I know it has slightly been covered, but I'd just like you to explain it a bit more, please.
Sure. So it comes back to supply and demand. If there was more demand than there was supply, then creating additional space would serve that additional demand and jobs would be generated. If, on the other hand, as I believe to be the case, there is not sufficient demand to exceed supply, then that supply would not necessarily create work because it would go to another studio. I'm talking about net jobs. But even if you're talking about absolute numbers of jobs, building something doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be used. If I were to build a large block of flats or a shopping centre or something like that, it wouldn't guarantee that there will be tenants in that shopping centre or in those flats. The only way to work out whether a facility is going to be utilised is by doing a market analysis, not just by assuming that by building it they will come.
And I know that you've talked about this market analysis and not a lot.
Yes.
We haven't, as far as I'm aware, been presented with one, but are you saying that you don't think the appellants have done one whatsoever?
There's no evidence in this application that they have, because in my opinion, if they had done such a market analysis, then there would be a lot more rigor in their arguments for why they can why their claims will be realized.
Okay. Right, I understand. Thank you. Okay.
Welcome.
Ms. Nevin, any re-examination questions, please?
No re-examination points. Thank you,
Okay.
ma'am.
Thank you. Right, so then suitable point to adjourn the inquiry. Anything people want to raise? I've just seen I've got 2 emails come in for another draft 106. It's all right. You're just going to have to talk me through it tomorrow because I don't have time to look at it tonight because I need to look at the evidence for tomorrow. So talk me through it tomorrow. 1 second. And then I've got another site visit itinerary come through. Is that? Yeah.
That's for Monday, madam. You'll
That's
see
Monday.
there's an agreed itinerary, starting here at 10:15 on Monday.
Okay.
Going first to Shinfield, then going to Pinewood, incorporating all of the
All of
site
the
visits.
other bits. Excellent. Okay, thank you. Right. That's fine. Anything else anybody else wants to raise? Yes, at the back. Not now. No, his evidence is concluded, so it's too late now. Sorry. Okay. Thank you, everyone. We are back on tomorrow at 10. Do you want to do 10 or do you want to do 9:30? What? Well, yeah, ideally, if that's okay. Just so that I can make a start back up north. Okay, super. Right, so we'll resume at 9:30 tomorrow. We're adjourned until then. Thank you.